The notification popped up on my phone while I was reviewing code at my desk. Your access to Hammond Family Cloud has been revoked by the administrator. I smiled and took a sip of my coffee. After 7 years of marriage to their son and 3 years since the divorce, the Hammond family have finally pulled the trigger. They deleted me from the family cloud storage, erasing my access to 8 years of photos, videos, and memories. What they didn't know was that they just triggered something much more significant than a simple account deletion. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an automated message from my own server. Dead man's switch activated. Deletion detected at 2:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Data package will be sent to designated recipients in 24 hours unless manual override code is entered. I didn't enter the override code. Let me back up. I'm Iris Walker, formerly Iris Hammond. I married into the Hammond family when I was 23, young and naive enough to think that love conquered all. My ex-husband, Bradley Hammond, came from old money, the kind of family that had wings named after them at hospitals and libraries. His parents, Margaret and Theodore Hammond, tolerated me at first. I was a software engineer from a middle-class family, but at least I was smart and presentable. The tolerance ended when I discovered what the Hammond family really did with their fortune. It started innocently enough. 3 years into my marriage, Theodore asked me to help modernize their family systems. "You're so good with computers, dear," he'd said with that patronizing smile. "Perhaps you could help us organize our financial records better." I should have said no, but I wanted them to accept me, to see value in me beyond being Bradley's wife. So I built them a beautiful cloud storage system, complete with automated backups, encryption, and synchronized access across all their devices. I organized their photos, their documents, their entire digital life. That's when I found the first discrepancy. It was buried in a folder labeled Charitable Donations 2019. The Hammond Family Foundation, their nonprofit, was supposed to be building schools in Guatemala. The photos showed beautiful buildings with smiling children. But the metadata on those photos told a different story. They were stock photos, purchased from a photography website. The schools didn't exist. I dug deeper. The Hammond Family Foundation had raised over $50 million in the last decade. They'd built exactly 3 schools, total cost $400,000. The rest had been funneled through a complex web of shell companies in the Cayman Islands, eventually making its way back to the Hammond family accounts. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was finding the communications about me. Email threads between Margaret and Bradley discussing how long they should tolerate the gold digger. Messages about the prenup I'd signed, with Margaret bragging about how her lawyer had made it ironclad and that I'd never see a penny if Bradley divorced me. And finally, the messages planning Bradley's affair with Vivienne Cross, the daughter of their country club friends. The affair that would give him grounds for divorce while painting me as the neglectful wife. I confronted Bradley that night. He didn't even deny it. "It's just business, Iris," he'd said, as if orchestrating an affair was like arranging a merger. "Mother thinks Vivienne is a better fit for the family brand." The family brand. As if marriage was a corporate acquisition. I could have exposed them then. Should have, probably. But I was hurt, angry, and wanted to be smart about it. So I did what I do best. I coded. Over the next 6 months, while Bradley carried on his staged affair and his family prepared for the divorce they thought would leave me with nothing, I built my insurance policy. I created hidden partitions in their cloud storage system. Places where I copied every incriminating document, every fraudulent receipt, every piece of evidence of their tax evasion and charity fraud. Then I built the dead man's switch. It was elegant in its simplicity. As long as my account remained active in the family cloud, nothing would happen. But if my access was revoked, a timer would start. 24 hours later, unless I entered a specific override code, everything would be sent to the IRS, the FBI, the Attorney General's office, and every major news outlet in the country. I also did something else. I used my administrative access to set up a legitimate backup system for the Hammond Foundation, one that actually donated money to real charities. Every month, it would automatically transfer funds from their accounts to verified nonprofits. Small amounts at first, $10,000 here, $15,000 there. The kinds of amounts they wouldn't notice among their vast wealth. The divorce was brutal. Bradley's family painted me as a tech-obsessed workaholic who had neglected her marriage. They had photos of Bradley with Vivienne, looking happy and in love. They had witnesses who testified that I spent more time with computers than with my husband. The prenup held up exactly as Margaret had planned. I walked away with nothing but my personal belongings and my laptop. "You're nobody now," Margaret had whispered to me outside the courthouse. "Just another failed social climber who thought she could play in the big leagues. We're erasing you from our family history. You'll be deleted, just like you never existed." That was 3 years ago. For 3 years, I'd maintained minimal contact with the Hammond family, just enough to keep my access to the cloud storage active. I'd send Bradley birthday emails he never answered. I'd comment on family photos occasionally, just enough presents to avoid deletion. Meanwhile, the automatic donations had been running. The Hammond Foundation had unknowingly donated $3.7 million to actual charities over 3 years. Their accountant, William Frost, had noticed the discrepancies last year, but when he tried to investigate, he found paper trails so perfect, documentation so complete, that it looked like the Hammonds had simply become more generous. They couldn't deny donations that had their digital signatures, that came from their verified accounts, that had thank you letters from real children in real schools. They'd been forced to take credit for charity they'd never intended to do. But today, they'd finally decided I'd been forgotten long enough. Margaret had probably ordered it herself, a final act of erasure. Delete Iris Walker from the family cloud. Remove the last trace of her existence from our lives. My phone rang. It was Bradley. "Iris, it's me. Look, I don't know what you did, but you need to undo it. Now." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said calmly, putting him on speaker while I continued coding. "Don't play dumb. Mom got an automated email saying something about financial records being released to the IRS. It came from our cloud system. It has your digital signature all over it." "Oh, that." I minimized my code editor and pulled up the dead man's switch dashboard. "That's just an automated security system I installed years ago. You remember when your father asked me to help modernize your systems? Well, turn it off." "I can't. It's triggered by account deletion. You deleted my account, so the system assumes something catastrophic has happened. It's designed to preserve evidence in case of criminal interference." There was silence on the other end. Then, criminal interference? Well, yes. The system contains extensive financial records that might be relevant to ongoing investigations. If someone were to, say, delete an account to hide evidence, the system automatically reports everything to the authorities. It's actually a legal compliance feature. "Iris, this isn't funny. You need to stop this." I have 21 hours and, I checked the timer, 14 minutes to enter and override code. But here's the thing, Bradley. I don't think I want to. "What do you want? Money? Is that what this is about?" I laughed. "I don't want your money. I never did. I wanted a family. I wanted to belong. Instead, I got a masterclass in white-collar crime and emotional manipulation. Name your price." "There is no price. But there are conditions." I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Margaret's shrill voice, Theodore's booming assertions that they'd sue me into oblivion. Then Bradley came back on. "What conditions?" "First, full reinstatement of my cloud access. I want every photo, every video, every memory from my 8 years with your family. Those are my memories too, regardless of how things ended." "Fine. Done. What else?" "Second, the Hammond Foundation commits to building 20 schools in Guatemala. Real schools with real teachers and real students. I want ground broken within 6 months and completed within 2 years. 20 schools. That would cost about $10 million, a fraction of what you've stolen over the years." More muffled arguing. Then, "Okay, what else?" "Third, you admit what you did. All of it. The staged affair, the planned divorce, the charity fraud. I want a written confession, notarized and witnessed." "Absolutely not." "Then I'll see you on the evening news tomorrow. I'm sure the headline, 'Prominent Hammond Family Exposed in $50 million Charity Fraud,' will do wonders for your family brand." The line went quiet for so long, I thought he'd hung up. Then Margaret's voice came on, cold and controlled. "Hello, Iris." "Margaret. You always were too smart for your own good, or just smart enough to protect myself. We'll restore your access. We'll build the schools, but we will not confess to crimes we didn't commit." "Didn't commit?" I have every email, Margaret, every falsified document, every stock photo you claimed was a school your foundation built. Would you like me to read you the email where you called the Guatemalan children photo props for tax write-offs? Silence. Here's my final offer, I said. Restore my access. Build the schools. And the Hammond Foundation goes completely legitimate. No more shell companies, no more tax havens. You actually become the philanthropist you pretend to be. I'll monitor everything through the cloud access you so graciously restore. If you comply, the dead man's switch gets disabled permanently. And if we don't, then in 21 hours, your family loses everything. Your reputation, your fortune, your freedom. Theodore's looking at 20 years for tax evasion alone. You'll be lucky to get 10. Bradley might get off with 5 if he cooperates. Little Vivienne will have to find another rich family to marry into. You're destroying our lives. No, Margaret, I'm giving you the chance to actually become the people you've been pretending to be. Build real schools. Help real children. Use your fortune for something besides buying your way into heaven while stealing from the collection plate. We'll destroy you. We'll sue you for blackmail, for extortion. Interesting legal strategy, considering everything I have is evidence of your crimes. Besides, I'm not asking for money. I'm asking you to donate to charity, which you've been claiming to do anyway. How does that look in court? Your Honor, she's forcing us to actually give money to the charities we claim to support. Yeah, good luck with that. I heard Theodore in the background. Just agree to it. We can figure out how to deal with her later. Oh, Theodore, still thinking 3 moves ahead when I'd already played out the entire game. One more thing, I added. The automatic donation system I installed 3 years ago. The one that's been slowly draining your accounts to fund actual charities, it stays active. In fact, it increases. From now on, the Hammond Foundation donates 60% of its intake to verified charities. I monitor everything. You try to shut it down, change the passwords, or delete my access again, and everything goes public immediately. 60%? That's robbery. No, that's philanthropy, something you should have learned about before creating a fake charitable foundation. Margaret's breathing was audible through the phone. How do we know you won't release everything anyway? Because unlike your family, I keep my word. You know that, Margaret. It's why you worked so hard to get rid of me. I was too honest for the Hammond family. Another long silence. Then, we'll need it in writing. A contract. Already drafted. Check your email. You have 3 hours to sign and return it, or I let the timer run out. 3 hours. Our lawyers need. Your lawyers are who got you into this mess. 3 hours, Margaret. Oh, and the access restoration happens now. I want to see it active within the next 10 minutes, or the deal's off. I hung up. 7 minutes later, my access was restored. The notification popped up on my phone. Welcome back to Hammond Family Cloud. I scrolled through the photos, seeing my own face again in family Christmas cards, vacation photos, wedding pictures. They tried to erase me, but I was woven too deeply into their history. 8 years couldn't just be deleted. The signed contract came back in 2 hours and 47 minutes. They'd agreed to everything. I entered the override code with 5 hours to spare. But I kept the dead man's switch active, just modified its triggers. Now it would activate if they missed a charitable donation, if they created new shell companies, or if they tried to delete my access again. The Hammond family would be the most generous philanthropists in the country, whether they wanted to be or not. That night, I got a text from Bradley. You won. I texted back, no, those kids in Guatemala won. I just made sure you couldn't steal from them anymore. He didn't respond, but I saw him typing for a long time. Finally, I actually loved you once, you know, before Mother got involved. I know, I replied. That's the saddest part of all this. 3 months later, I attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the first Hammond Foundation school in Guatemala. Margaret had to stand next to me for the photo, smiling like we were old friends. The local press called it a revolutionary partnership between technology and philanthropy. If only they knew the revolution had started with a deletion, a dead man's switch, and a woman who refused to be erased. The Hammond family still has their fortune, their reputation, and their freedom. But they also have me forever embedded in their cloud storage and their charitable obligations, a ghost in their machine making sure they stay honest. They tried to delete me from their family. Instead, I became their conscience. And the best part, the dead man's switch is still there, waiting. They know it, I know it, and we all pretend it doesn't exist. Just like we pretend to be a happy, philanthropic family in all those photos in the cloud. The only difference is now they're pretending actually helps people.
My mother declared me broken on Christmas Day 5 years ago. It wasn't a dramatic table-flipping scene. It was worse. It was quiet, delivered with the casual cruelty of a woman stating an obvious fact, like the sky being blue or the turkey being dry. My name is Serena. I was 33 at the time, sitting at my parents' polished mahogany dining table, surrounded by the scent of pine and simmering resentment. My younger sister, Roslyn, who was then 29, sat opposite me, glowing with the smug satisfaction of a life lived according to our mother's blueprint. She had the successful husband, the 2 perfect children, and a 3rd on the way. I had a house I'd bought with my own money and a diagnosis of unexplained infertility that my family treated like a terminal character flaw. The conversation, as it always did, turned to legacy. My mother, Christine, picked at her green beans and sighed. A family is a tree, you know. It needs branches to grow, strong branches. Her eyes slid over to me and the corner of her mouth tightened. A woman's body is meant for one thing, Serena. If it can't do that, it's just a house with no one home. My father, Randolph, stared intently at his plate, mastering the art of strategic silence he'd perfected over 40 years of marriage. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I felt the familiar burn of shame crawl up my neck. I was a house with no one home, empty, defective. Before I could even form a response, Rosalind placed a hand over her gently rounded stomach and beamed at our mother. "Well, Mom, our family line is safe. We're pregnant again." The table erupted. My father finally looked up, a relieved smile spreading across his face. My mother clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with tears of genuine joy. They fawned over Rosalind, asking about due dates and names, their voices a symphony of adoration. I became invisible, a ghost at the feast. Rosalind shot me a look across the table, not of malice, but of pity, which was so much worse. It was the look you give a stray dog, a broken toy. I excused myself, the lie of a headache tasting like ash in my mouth. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the festive wrapping paper was crammed into trash bags, I confronted them in the living room. The Christmas tree lights blinked, casting mocking little stars across their faces. "What you said tonight," I started, my voice shaking, "was unforgivable." Christine didn't flinch. She sipped her brandy and looked at me over the rim of the glass. "The truth often is, dear. Rosalind is building a family, a legacy. What are you building? An empty house for one? It's an embarrassment." I turned to my father, my last hope. "Dad, are you going to say anything?" He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "Your mother just wants what's best for you, Serena, for the family." That was it, the final snap, the realization that I wasn't a daughter to them, I was a failed project, a disappointment they were tired of hiding. "I am your family," I whispered, the words feeling hollow. My mother stood up, her face a mask of cold resolve. She walked over to me and placed a hand not on my shoulder, but on the front door, as if showing me the way out. "You are a dead end, Serena," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal tone. "You bring nothing to this family's future. So here's the deal. Don't come back. Don't call. Don't show up for holidays with your sad eyes and your empty womb. Don't come back until you have something real to offer." I drove home in a daze, the festive lights of the neighborhood blurring through my tears. I walked into my beautiful, quiet house, the house they called empty, the one they said was too big for someone with no future, and closed the door behind me. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the silent foyer. It was the sound of an ending and a beginning. They wanted me to vanish. I did. And then I rebuilt. The first year was the hardest. The silence in my house was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered every sound. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator was a reminder of my isolation. My family had performed a surgical excision, cutting me out of their lives so cleanly that it felt like I'd never existed at all. No calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive birthday card. I was 33 years old and utterly alone, but solitude, I learned, is a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets. I started by filling the silence with noise, podcasts, music, audiobooks. Then, gradually, I started to prefer the quiet. It was in that quiet that I began to hear my own voice again. A voice that wasn't pleading for acceptance or defending my existence. I poured all the energy I'd once spent on my family into my work. I was a strategic communications consultant, and I went from being a freelancer to the founder of my own small remote firm. I worked relentlessly, building a client list that spanned 3 continents. My days were filled with Zoom calls and strategy sessions, my nights with drafting proposals and analyzing market data. My business became my baby, the thing I nurtured and grew. About 2 years in, I got a message on LinkedIn from Mekhi Evans. We'd been in the same program in college, 2 of the only people who actually enjoyed late-night study sessions on rhetorical theory. He was now heading a tech startup in Seattle and needed help with a brand launch. What started as a one-off contract quickly evolved into a partnership. He was sharp, funny, and treated me like an equal, not a pity case. Our weekly video calls became less about work and more about life. He was the first person in years who asked me how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. With financial security came a different kind of freedom. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before my marriage ended and the infertility nightmare began. The second spare bedroom, the one I'd once secretly imagined as a nursery with pale yellow walls and a white crib, became my studio. I covered the floors in canvas drop cloths, splattered the walls with paint, and let the smell of turpentine and oil fill the space. I painted huge abstract canvases full of the chaotic, vibrant colors I was finally allowing myself to feel. The other spare room, the one Roslyn had suggested would be perfect for a playroom, became my office, my war room. One wall was covered in a massive whiteboard filled with client flowcharts and project timelines. My desk faced the window overlooking the garden I'd learned to cultivate. The guest room downstairs, once intended for my parents' visits, was now a home gym. I'd traded a floral bedspread for a Peloton and a set of weights. I remembered Roslyn walking through the house shortly after I bought it, her arms crossed, a critical look on her face. "That house is way too big for someone with no future," she'd said, her tone dripping with sisterly concern that was really just thinly veiled contempt. She was wrong. My future wasn't empty. It was just mine. I had built a life inside these walls that was full and meaningful, a life that didn't require anyone else's approval. For 5 years, I had peace. Then, last Tuesday, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Serena?" The voice was thin, reedy, and instantly recognizable. It was my mother. 5 years of silence, and she spoke my name as if we'd talked yesterday. I didn't say anything. "Serena, are you there? I need you to listen to me," she said, her voice gaining its familiar demanding edge. There was no apology, no preamble, just need. "Things are difficult." Percy left her. He just packed a bag and walked out. Left her with the kids and a mountain of debt. I remained silent, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear her take a shaky breath on the other end of the line. "They're losing the house. They have nowhere to go. Serena, You have all that space. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I finally found my voice. What do you want from me? Christine's voice cracked with manufactured desperation, a tool she'd wielded my entire life. It's Roslyn. You're her last hope. I let my mother's words hang in the air for a full day before I called her back. I spent that time talking to Meki, walking through my garden, and sitting in my studio, surrounded by the life I had built. I wasn't the same woman they had thrown away. I wasn't going to let them detonate my peace. I will agree to a discussion, I said when Christine finally answered, my voice level and calm. You, Dad, and Roslyn can come here on Saturday at noon. We will talk. That is all I'm agreeing to. She tried to argue, to push for more, but I cut her off. Noon on Saturday, that's the offer. I hung up before she could reply. They arrived precisely at noon, pulling up in a dented minivan that was a significant downgrade from the luxury SUV Roslyn used to drive. My father got out first, looking older and more stooped than I remembered. Then my mother, her posture rigid with forced dignity. Last was Roslyn. The 5 years had not been kind to her. Her face was pale and puffy, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She looked brittle, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped one too many times. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. For a moment, we all just stood there. I saw the flicker of shock in their eyes. I wasn't the wayfish, heartbroken woman they'd cast out. I was 38 now, fit from the gym in my guest room and dressed in tailored trousers and a silk blouse. My hair was styled, my makeup was subtle, and I met their gazes with a calm confidence that felt like armor. You look, well, my mother said, the words tasting like a concession she didn't want to make. I am, I replied, stepping aside to let them in. Please, come in. They walked into the foyer, their eyes darting around, taking in the changes. The drab, beige walls were now a warm gallery white, hung with pieces of my art. The generic furniture was gone, replaced with clean modern pieces. It's very minimalist, Roslyn muttered, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. It was her way of calling it sterile, empty. It's uncluttered, I corrected gently, leading them into the living room. My father sank into an armchair without a word, looking deeply uncomfortable. My mother and Roslyn sat ramrod straight on the sofa, a pair of displaced queens surveying a foreign territory. So, Christine began, getting straight to the point. As I said, Roslyn is in a terrible position. Percy was a snake. He cleaned out their accounts. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and the surprising thing was, I almost meant it. I wasn't sorry for Roslyn, but for the idea of anyone going through that. We need a place to stay, Roslyn said, her voice cracking. Just for a little while. Until I can get back on my feet. I looked at her, at the desperation warring with the deep-seated entitlement in her eyes. This was the woman who had pitied me, who had stood by and watched as our mother shredded my soul. Before we discuss that, I said, standing up, let me show you the house. It's been a while. A flicker of confusion crossed their faces, but they followed me. I led them down the main hallway, the same one Roslyn had once declared a waste of space. I stopped outside the first door on the left, the room that was supposed to be a nursery. I pushed it open. The room was a riot of color. Canvases leaned against every wall, some taller than I was. An easel stood in the center of the room, holding a half-finished painting, jars of brushes, palettes smeared with paint, and the sharp, clean scent of turpentine filled the air. It was a room bursting with life, with creation. My mother's lips thinned. A hobby. I ignored her and moved to the next door, the would-be playroom. I opened it to reveal my office. The massive whiteboard dominated one wall, covered in complex diagrams and notes. My dual monitor setup sat on a sleek, modern desk, humming quietly. Books on business strategy and market analysis lined the shelves. "This is where I work," I said simply. "My firm has clients in 7 countries now." They were silent, utterly, completely silent. The narrative they had built around me, the sad, barren spinster in her big, empty house, was crumbling before their eyes. I hadn't just survived. I had built an empire in the rooms they had designated for a life I couldn't have. I led them back to the living room. The air was thick with their shock and my quiet satisfaction. They sat down, looking smaller than they had before. I remained standing, feeling for the first time like I was the one in charge. My mother looked around the room, her gaze cold and assessing, as if recalculating a complex equation. She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. "So," she said, her voice as sharp and icy as a shard of glass, "when do we move in?" A slow smirk spread across my face. They still didn't get it. They never would. I met my mother's icy gaze and allowed a small, tight smile. "Move in? I don't think you understand. This isn't a negotiation. You asked for my help. I am offering you a place to stay for 2 nights, 48 hours. After that, you'll need to have found other arrangements." A stunned silence fell over the room. Rosalind's jaw dropped. 2 nights? Serena, I have 3 children. Where are we supposed to go? That sounds like a question for the person who created that situation, not the one who was disowned by her family 5 years ago, I said, my voice even. "The guest room and the pull-out sofa are yours. The children can have sleeping bags on the floor. Take it or leave it." They took it. An hour later, the minivan returned and the chaos began. Rosalind's children, 13-year-old Felicity, 8-year-old Mason, and 6-year-old Chloe, spilled into my pristine home like a tidal wave of noise and sticky fingers. Mason immediately started trying to climb my bookshelves, while Chloe chased my cat, who fled under my bed and refused to come out. I spent the next day observing the wreckage of Rosalind's perfect life. She was a ghost, drifting from room to room with a wineglass permanently attached to her hand, her eyes vacant. My mother, on the other hand, was in her element, directing traffic and issuing critiques. "This wall color is so cold, Serena. A nice warm taupe would make it feel more like a home," she'd say, while simultaneously ignoring her screaming grandchildren. It was a jarring flashback to a dinner party years ago, when I'd mentioned wanting to keep the guest room for myself as a quiet reading space. "How selfish," Christine had chided me in front of everyone. "A home is for family, not for one person to hoard space." The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. The only island of calm in the storm was Felicity. She was quiet and watchful, with intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. That evening, while the others were arguing over the television, I found her standing in the doorway of my studio, staring at the large, half-finished canvas on my easel. "What is it supposed to be?" she asked, her voice soft. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "Right now, it's just feelings, anger mostly, but there's some peace in there too." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on a slash of vibrant yellow. "I get that." She didn't say anything else, just stood there for another minute before slipping away. The next afternoon, Meki came by to drop off some contracts. He walked in just as Mason knocked over a vase of flowers I'd cut from my garden. Water and petals went everywhere. Rosalind didn't even look up from her phone, and Christine just sighed dramatically. I cleaned it up myself, my jaw tight. Meki followed me into the kitchen. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," I lied. He leaned against the counter, his expression serious. "Serena, I've known you for 20 years. You're not fine. You're enduring. This is an invasion." He paused, then said, "You need to protect yourself. Document everything. Every passive-aggressive comment, every mess they make, every demand. Record them if you have to. They taught you your worth by showing you what they valued. Maybe it's time to teach them who they were. His words struck a chord. He was right. This wasn't about being the bigger person anymore. This was about survival. That night, long after the house had finally fallen into a tense silence, I went into my office to finish some work. I noticed my laptop was slightly askew on the desk, not how I'd left it. A prickle of unease went down my spine. On a hunch, I opened my email program and checked the sent folder. My blood ran cold. There it was. An email, sent less than an hour ago from my account. It was addressed to a man I recognized as a former colleague of Rosalind's, now a headhunter. And attached to it was a password-protected file labeled Client Contacts. The body of the email was short and sickeningly familiar. It was Rosalind, pretending to be me, offering up my entire client list for a finder's fee. She was trying to sell my business out from under me, from inside my own home. I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face, and let the rage burn through me. It was a clean, clarifying fire. The hurt was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Meki was right. This was war. The next morning was their last. The 48-hour deadline was up at noon. I found Rosalind in the kitchen, pouring herself a coffee as if she owned the place. I held up my phone, the screen displaying the sent email. "Explain this," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She glanced at it and shrugged, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "I need to make money, Serena. You have so many clients you wouldn't even miss a few. You broke into my private account and tried to sell my professional contacts." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's not stealing if we're family. We're supposed to help each other." The audacity of it stole my breath. Before I could respond, my mother swept into the room, a Bible in her hand. She'd clearly overheard. "Serena, your sister is desperate," Christine said, her voice dripping with pious condescension. "You need to have some compassion. God gave you this house, this success, so that you could serve your blood. It is your duty to provide for them." "God had nothing to do with it," I snapped back. "I built this life, and this house is not a community resource center. It's my home." My father shuffled in, drawn by the raised voices. He wrung his hands, his eyes darting between us. "Now, girls, let's just calm down. We can work this out." I turned the full force of my glare on him. "Work this out? Where was this energy 5 years ago, Dad? Where was your voice when she—" I pointed a trembling finger at my mother. "Called me a dead end and threw me out? You were silent. Your silence was an answer. So you don't get to play mediator now." He shrank back, his face pale. I spent the rest of the morning on the phone with Meki. He listened to the whole story, his silence punctuated by sharp intakes of breath. "Okay," he said when I finished. "Phase 1 is containment. Change every password you have. Phase 2 is offense. I know a guy who does private security. We can get some discrete cameras installed today. Legally, it's your house. You can monitor the common areas. We need to know what they're really planning." By mid-afternoon, a technician posing as an internet repairman had installed several tiny, nearly invisible cameras in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. That evening, I told my family I had a business dinner and left. In reality, I drove to a nearby park and watched the live feed on my phone, my assistant Aaliyah on the phone with me from her own apartment. Aaliyah had been my rock for 3 years. She was fiercely loyal, whip-smart, and had a zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. "They're vultures, Serena," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Let's find out what they really want." We didn't have to wait long. Once they thought I was gone, the masks came off. I watched as Rosalind paced the living room, talking on the phone to someone I couldn't hear. No, it's perfect, she said, her voice giddy. She's barely here. The mail comes to a P.O. box, but I can get a few bills redirected. If I can prove I've been living here for 30 days, I can establish tenancy. My lawyer says it'll be a nightmare for her to evict me. Maybe I can even argue I have an equity stake. Emotional distress, family obligation. She'll have to buy me out to get rid of me. I felt the blood drain from my face. Aaliyah let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. It wasn't just about a place to crash. This was a calculated hostile takeover. Roslyn wasn't just trying to move in. She was trying to stake a legal claim to my home. I drove back, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I walked in to find them all sitting around the dinner table, eating leftovers from my fridge. They looked up, surprised to see me. My mother immediately started in. You know, Serena, if you're going to have us here, the least you could do is cook a proper meal. I held up a hand, silencing her. I walked to the head of the table and looked at each of them in turn. My enabling father, my manipulative mother, my parasitic sister. You're trying to rob someone you once called broken? I said, my voice low and shaking with a controlled fury they had never heard before. You're about to learn how whole I really am. The next 2 days were a performance. I became the daughter they'd always wanted. Solicitous, accommodating, and seemingly oblivious. I told them I'd had a change of heart, that they were right, family was everything. I said they could stay for a month while they figured things out. The relief on their faces was sickening. They thought they had won. Behind the scenes, I was moving pieces into place. I hired a lawyer. I had Aaliyah compile a dossier on Roslyn's financial situation, including the parental neglect complaints that had been filed with her children's school. And I planned a dinner party. Just a few people, I told them casually. My business partner, Meki, will be here, and I'd love for you to meet my lawyer just to get some informal advice on your situation. I also invited Felicity's school counselor. I thought it would be good for her to see Felicity in a stable home environment. My mother preened, delighted at the chance to hold court. Roslyn was wary but too arrogant to refuse. They had no idea they were walking into a meticulously set trap. The night of the dinner, I was a gracious host. I served an elaborate meal, poured expensive wine, and guided the conversation. Makey was charming, my lawyer, Ms. Davies, was professional and warm, and the school counselor, Mrs. Gable, observed everything with a quiet intensity. My family, feeling validated, put on their best faces. Christine bragged about my sudden success, and Roslyn spoke of her temporary setback with the air of a tragic heroine. After dessert, I stood up, tapping my wine glass for attention. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady. I wanted to gather everyone here tonight for a formal announcement. I nodded to Meki, who discreetly turned on his phone's video camera, placing it on the sideboard where it had a clear view of the table. As of this moment, I continued, my eyes locking onto my mother's, my family are no longer guests in this house. They are trespassers. Ms. Davies will be filing a restraining order first thing in the morning on my behalf. They have 1 hour to collect their things and vacate the premises. The colour drained from Christine's face. Roslyn shot to her feet. You can't do this. We have rights. You have no rights here, Ms. Davies interjected calmly. You are not on the lease, you do not pay bills, and you have established no legal tenancy. You were here under Serena's explicit temporary permission, which has now been revoked. But you said we could stay, my father stammered, looking utterly bewildered. I lied, I said simply, a skill I learned from watching you all for 33 years. I picked up a small remote from the table. You see, you've all been very vocal about my perceived failings over the years. You've had a lot to say about my worth. I thought it was only fair to return the favor. I pressed a button. A Bluetooth speaker on the bookshelf crackled to life. My mother's voice, sharp and cruel, filled the room. It was a recording from one of the hidden cameras. She owes us this. After all the embarrassment she's caused, being barren, this house is the least she can do to make up for being such a broken, useless daughter. I pressed the button again. Now it was Rosalind's voice, giddy and conspiratorial. My lawyer says it'll be a nightmare for her to evict me. Maybe I can even argue I have an equity stake. She'll have to buy me out to get rid of me. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother looked like she'd been turned to stone. Rosalind was shaking, her face a mottled red. Mrs. Gable, the school counselor, was taking meticulous notes. I looked at them, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. You didn't come here for shelter. You came here to colonize, to take what I built because you felt entitled to it. You called me broken, but you're the ones who are hollow. Suddenly, there was a scrape of a chair. Felicity, who had been silent through the whole ordeal, stood up. Tears were streaming down her face. She walked around the table, past her stunned mother and grandmother, and came to stand by my side. She wrapped her arms around my waist. I want to live with you, she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. Before anyone could react, my phone buzzed on the table. It was an email notification. The sender's name made my blood freeze. Percy Myers. The subject line was simple. My kids, my share. The arrival of Percy's email was a grenade tossed into an already volatile room. Rosalind stared at my phone, her face a mask of horror. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, raised an eyebrow, and Makey shot me a look of concern. I ignored them all, my focus narrowing to the immediate threat. My family was still in my house. The hour starts now, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. Ms. Davies and Mrs. Gable, thank you for your time. Makey, would you mind staying? He nodded, a silent promise of support. The two women left, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from public humiliation to raw, private fury. You set us up, Christine shrieked, finding her voice. This is monstrous. No, I replied calmly. Monstrous is disowning your child. Monstrous is trying to steal her home. This is just consequences. I watched them scramble to pack, their movements frantic and clumsy. They stuffed clothes into garbage bags, their pride in tatters. Felicity stayed by my side, a silent, defiant sentinel. When Rosalind tried to grab her arm, Felicity pulled away. I'm not going with you, she said, her young voice firm. We'll discuss that later, Rosalind hissed, her eyes wild. Within the hour, they were gone. The minivan peeled out of my driveway, leaving a trail of exhaust and shattered relationships in its wake. I closed the door, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden, blessed silence. The next day, I met Percy at a neutral coffee shop. He was exactly as I remembered him, slick, handsome, and radiating an aura of cheap cologne and desperation. He thought he was coming to meet an ally, someone he could team up with against his estranged wife. She's trying to cut me out, he said, leaning forward conspiratorially, telling everyone I abandoned the kids. But I hear you've been helping her, that she's living in your big, fancy house. I took a slow sip of my latte. She was, I said. Things have changed, but you're right, she's been making some interesting plans. I let that hang in the air. She was telling me just the other day how she's planning to sue you for full custody and maximum child support. Said she's got a lawyer who thinks she can get everything, the car, what's left of the savings. She seems to think you're a deadbeat with no legal standing. I wasn't lying, just curating the truth. I was feeding his own worst fears back to him, seasoned with Rosalind's own brand of selfish scheming. Percy's face darkened. She what? That little, after I gave her everything? Her words, not mine. I said with a small shrug. She seems to think she has the upper hand. Living in my house was part of her strategy to look like a stable parent. I didn't need to do anything else. I had wound him up and pointed him in Rosalind's direction. He left the coffee shop in a rage, pulling out his phone. I knew with absolute certainty that Rosalind's life was about to get exponentially more difficult. It didn't take long. 2 days later, my mother called, her voice a hysterical screech. Percy was threatening to sue for full custody unless Rosalind signed over the minivan and the last of their joint savings account. He was using my words as ammunition, twisting them to make it sound like Rosalind and I had been plotting against him. "This is your fault," Christine screamed into the phone. "You turned him against her. You have to fix this. You have to give Rosalind money. You have to help her fight him." And that's when I finally snapped. The years of quiet pain, of forced smiles and bitten-back words erupted out of me in a torrent. "My fault?" I yelled, pacing my studio, the colors on the canvases blurring around me. "You want to talk about fault? You stood by and called me broken while your golden child built a life on a foundation of lies. You threw me away because I couldn't give you grandchildren, and now you want me to pay for the ones she can't take care of? You reap what you sow, all of you. You planted a garden of poison and you are shocked that you don't get to harvest roses. This is your mess, Rosalind's mess, Percy's mess. You can all drown in it together. Do not call me again." I hung up, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was over. The final tie was severed. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Felicity standing on my porch. She had a small suitcase in one hand and her school backpack over her shoulder. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. "They're at a motel," she said quietly. "Grandma and Mom just scream at each other all day. I took a bus." She looked up at me, her expression a heartbreaking mix of hope and fear. "You said your house was for making art. I want to make something real." The process of becoming Felicity's legal guardian was an education in navigating a system designed for chaos. It involved social workers, court dates, and a mountain of paperwork. Rosalind fought it, of course, but her fight was disorganized and fueled by spite rather than genuine maternal concern. She missed appointments. She failed mandated drug tests. Mrs. Gable's testimony about the neglect, combined with my stable home and Felicity's unwavering desire to stay with me, made the judge's decision straightforward. 6 months after she appeared on my doorstep with a suitcase, the papers were signed. She was mine to care for. Life with a teenager was a different kind of quiet. It was filled with the soft sounds of Felicity sketching in the living room, the muffled beat of music from her bedroom, and late-night conversations over bowls of ice cream. We found a rhythm. I taught her how to stretch a canvas, and she taught me about the complex social hierarchies of the 9th grade. My house, once a fortress of solitude, became a home. The fallout for the rest of my family was swift and brutal. The parental neglect investigation, spurred by Mrs. Gable's report, put Rosalind under a microscope she couldn't withstand. She lost custody of Mason and Chloe, who were placed in temporary foster care pending my parents' application to become their guardians. To afford the legal fees and the expense of raising 2 young children, my parents had to sell their polished mahogany dining table and the house that went with it. They drained their retirement savings and moved into a cramped condo in a senior living community an hour away. Rosalind, stripped of her children and her financial safety nets, drifted, taking low-wage jobs and living in a series of grim apartments. Her public grace had evaporated, leaving only the bitter residue of her choices. My business, meanwhile, flourished. With the threat of my family neutralized, Makey and I took on bigger projects, expanding our reach. We were partners in every sense of the word, our late-night strategy sessions often bleeding into shared dinners and easy laughter. The romantic tension that had simmered beneath the surface for years finally had room to breathe. Inspired by Felicity, I used some of the company's profits to launch a new initiative. We rented a small studio space downtown and started a series of free workshops for young women, teaching them everything from digital art and graphic design to how to write a business plan. We called it Rebuild You. It was my way of giving others the tools I'd had to forge for myself. There is one room in my house that remains locked. It's the small bedroom at the very end of the hall, the one that was never designated as a nursery or a playroom. It was just a spare room, waiting for a purpose. After my family left, I cleared it out completely. I painted the walls a stark, clinical white. In the center of the room, I placed a single pedestal. On top of it sits the small, innocuous Bluetooth speaker I used at the dinner party. It's a museum of one, a monument to the moment I took my power back. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I stand in the doorway and look at it. I never say what's inside, but I smile every time I walk past it. They called me broken, but I wasn't broken. I was just building something they couldn't imagine, and now they'll never be welcome inside it again.
There are two kinds of daughters in my family, the one who gets the help and the one who gets the praise for not needing it. I'm the second kind. My name is Sienna. I'm 29, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one, the good one, the one who never asked for too much. My sister Blair is 2 years younger. Where I was quiet, she was radiant. Where I saved my allowance, she'd spend hers and then charm Dad into giving her more. Our childhood was a masterclass in this dynamic. On my 17th birthday, my parents gave me the keys to the family's 10-year-old minivan. It was practical, they said, reliable. I was grateful. 6 months later, on Blair's 17th, a brand-new cherry-red convertible with a giant bow on it appeared in the driveway. It was a surprise, they said. She just had that kind of sparkle. I never complained. I got good grades, worked part-time jobs through college to minimize my student loans, and built a life for myself. I met Nasir, a man who is as steady and kind as the earth itself. And at 33, he was ready to build a future with me. When he proposed on a quiet Tuesday night in our small apartment, with our cat winding around his legs, I cried with a kind of quiet, profound joy I'd been waiting for my whole life. I couldn't wait to tell my parents. I called them, my voice shaking with excitement, and they sounded thrilled. "Our Sienna getting married," my mom, Laurel, cooed. "We have to celebrate." The celebration came a week later, over a tense Sunday dinner. After the plates were cleared, my mom folded her hands on the table, her expression shifting from celebratory to serious. My dad, George, just stared at his empty coffee cup. "Honey," Mom began, her voice soft and full of practiced sympathy. "Your father and I are so incredibly happy for you and Nasir. We really are." I smiled, waiting for the but. It always came. "But," she continued, "we need to be realistic about the wedding. Things are a little tight for us right now. It's just a tough year, financially." My dad nodded, finally looking up. "Your mother's right, Sienna. We want to help, of course, but we can't do what we might have in the past. We hope you understand." My smile felt frozen on my face. I looked at Nasir, who gave my hand a reassuring squeeze under the table. I'd never dreamed of a massive, extravagant wedding, but I had hoped for some help. The kind of help I'd seen them give Blair for every little thing, from a security deposit on a fancy apartment to funding her short-lived jewelry-making business. "Of course," I heard myself say, the good daughter autopilot kicking in. "I completely understand. We were planning on something small anyway." "We don't want you to worry." The relief on their faces was immediate and palpable. "Oh, good," Mom said, her smile returning, brighter than before. "I knew you'd be sensible about it. You've always been so independent. We're so proud of you." The praise felt like a consolation prize. I spent the car ride home feeling a familiar, dull ache of disappointment, immediately followed by a wave of guilt. How could I be upset? They said money was tight. I was a grown woman. I shouldn't expect a handout. I told Nasir I was fine, that we'd make it work. I started looking for a second job that night, picking up freelance graphic design work to do on weekends. A few weeks later, I was at my parents' house to drop off a book Mom had asked to borrow. She was on the phone in the hallway, her back to me. She was speaking in a low, conspiratorial whisper, a tone she usually reserved for family gossip. I stopped in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. No, he was very clear on the numbers, she said, her voice sharp. We can cover it. It's a gift, not a loan. A pause. I shifted my weight, the floorboard creaking slightly. She didn't turn around. It's fine, she continued, her voice dropping even lower. Just make sure the papers are signed before the closing date. Blair doesn't suspect a thing. My mother's words echoed in my head for days. Blair doesn't suspect a thing. A thing about what? A surprise party? A weekend trip? I tried to find an innocent explanation, a reason for the secrecy that didn't leave a bitter taste in my mouth. But every time I tried, the memory of my parents' relieved faces when I agreed to a small wedding pushed the thought away. The next few weeks were a blur of spreadsheets and overtime. I picked up enough freelance work to cover the deposit on a small, charming garden venue. Nasir took on extra shifts at the hospital. We were a team, pooling our savings for catering quotes and a photographer who charged by the hour. Every time I transferred money from my savings account, I felt a strange mix of pride and resentment. We were doing this ourselves. Because we had to. The suspicion that had taken root in the hallway began to grow. I'd ask my dad casual questions, trying to gauge the truth of their financial strain. One afternoon, I called him to ask about an old student loan. Hey, Dad, I was looking at my finances. Did you ever take out one of those Parent Plus loans for my tuition? I just want to make sure I have all my ducks in a row. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Oh, Sienna, he stammered, his voice suddenly thick. I don't think so. Your mother handled most of that. You know me. Terrible with paperwork. Could you just check? I pressed gently. It would really help. I'm a bit busy right now, sweetie, he said, the excuse flimsy and rushed. Let's talk about it later. He hung up before I could reply. He never brought it up again. It wasn't the no that bothered me. It was the panic. My dad was a terrible liar. My mom, on the other hand, was an expert. Her phone was always buzzing with calls she had to take in another room. She'd cup her hand over the receiver if I walked by, offering me a tight, dismissive smile. It was always about a friend from the club or a volunteer committee. The truth came out on a rainy Tuesday night. I had the deposit check for our venue, and my parents had offered to drop it off for me the next day to save me a trip. I drove over to their house after a long day of work, feeling exhausted. I let myself in with my old key and found the house quiet. I called out for my mom, and she answered from the back office. In here, honey. Just finishing up an email. I walked down the hall and stood in the doorway. She was at the computer, her back to me, typing furiously. Just brought the check, I said, holding up the envelope. Oh, great. Just leave it on the desk, she said, not turning around. I'll be right with you. Want some tea? Sure, I said. She stood up and bustled past me toward the kitchen. As she left, my eyes were drawn to the bright glow of the computer monitor she'd left open. I wasn't trying to snoop, not really. But the words on the screen were impossible to ignore. It was an email chain with a local realtor. The subject line read, Closing Docs 14 Willow Creek Lane. My heart started beating a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I took a hesitant step into the room, my hands suddenly cold. On the screen was a PDF attachment named giftletterhaze.pdf. I clicked on it. The document loaded, a formal letter addressed to a mortgage lender. It detailed a gift of $50,000 for a down payment. My breath hitched. The names of the recipients were typed in bold at the top, Blair Hayes and Stefan Bond. $50,000. Dollars. The number swam in front of my eyes. It was more than our entire wedding budget. It was a fortune. It was the reason things were a little tight. It wasn't a strain. It was a lie. A massive, calculated, soul-crushing lie. I heard my mom's footsteps returning from the kitchen. I quickly backed out of the room, my body moving on autopilot. She came back in, holding a mug of tea, and saw my face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She followed my gaze to the computer screen and her face went pale. She lunged for the mouse, frantically clicking to close the window. Her hands were shaking. She picked up her phone from the desk, fumbling with it as she tried to compose herself. Her thumb slipped, and a voice, my father's voice, suddenly filled the silent room, tinny and loud from the phone's speaker. "We're so excited to surprise Blair. She deserves this. We'll handle it all before Sienna's wedding. She doesn't need to know." The sound of my father's voice from the phone speaker hung in the air between us, an undeniable confession. My mother snatched the phone, her face a mask of horror. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The architect of the family image had lost control of the narrative. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A strange, icy calm washed over me. The hurt was so deep it felt like it was happening to someone else. I looked at the mug of tea in her hand, then back at her panicked face. "I should go," I said, my voice flat and even. "It's getting late." "Sienna, wait," she started, taking a step toward me. "It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" I asked, the question hanging there, unanswered. I turned and walked out of the office, down the hall, and out the front door without looking back. I left the venue deposit check on the hall table. Let them deliver their lie. The drive home was a blur. The shock slowly morphed into a cold, hard rage that settled deep in my bones. It wasn't just the money. It was the years of being the sensible one, the independent one, the one who was praised for needing less so that Blair could have more. It was the performance, the carefully crafted lie they told not just to me, but to everyone, to maintain the fiction of a fair and loving family. From that night on, something inside me shifted. I put on the mask of the good daughter, but this time, it was a weapon. I smiled. I was cheerful on the phone. When my mom called the next day, her voice trembling with forced nonchalance, I played along. "Did you get home okay, sweetie?" "You rushed out so fast." "I was just tired," I said, my voice light. "Long day. Thanks for offering to drop off that check, by the way. You're a lifesaver." The relief in her sigh was audible. She thought she'd gotten away with it. She thought I'd just swallow this, like I'd swallowed everything else. The wedding planning became my secret obsession. I threw myself into creating a beautiful day on a shoestring budget. I learned how to arrange my own flowers from YouTube tutorials. My best friend Yara, a talented baker, offered to make the cake as her wedding gift. Nasir and I spent weekends hand-addressing invitations. And oh, the invitations. My mom gave me the family address book, a thick, worn leather volume. "Make sure you send one to everyone," she'd said. "We don't want anyone to feel left out." I took her advice to heart. I sent an invitation to every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who had ever heard my parents lament their tight finances. I invited Great Aunt Carol, who my mom had complained to for an hour about the cost of wedding venues. I invited my dad's cousin from out of state, the one he'd told over Christmas that they were just scraping by this year. I was setting a stage, and I needed a full audience. Nasir noticed the change in me. I was quieter, more focused, with a brittle edge he wasn't used to. One evening, he found me staring at a blank Word document on my laptop, the cursor blinking rhythmically. "Everything okay?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. I minimized the window. "Just working on my vows," I lied. He kissed my temple. "You seem distant lately." Is it the wedding stress? Your parents? I wanted to tell him. I wanted to unload the entire ugly story and let him carry some of the weight. But it wasn't his burden to bear. This was mine. This was about my family, my history, my voice. Just stress, I said, forcing a smile. It'll all be over soon. He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep, I opened the laptop again. The document wasn't for my vows. I'd titled it, simply, Speech. I started to type. It wasn't a speech of gratitude. It was a speech of vengeance. A week before the wedding, Yara came over to help me assemble the party favors, tiny jars of local honey with custom labels. My laptop was open on the coffee table, still displaying the speech I'd been editing. I went to the kitchen to get us some wine, and when I came back, Yara was staring at the screen, her hand over her mouth. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. She read a line aloud, her voice a whisper. I'd like to thank my parents for their generous financial contribution to this wedding, which was, of course, nothing, a value they seemed to hold in high regard. She scrolled down, her breath catching. I just stood there, holding the wine bottles, my heart pounding. Finally, she looked up at me, her expression deadly serious. Sienna, they're going to hate you for this, she said, her voice barely audible. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Yara, the wine bottles feeling heavy in my hands. Hate me? I said, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. What do you think they feel for me now? Pride? Affection? This isn't about love, Yara. It's about balance. She closed the laptop gently, as if it were a fragile, dangerous thing. I get it. I really do. I don't want you to get hurt even more. The hurt is already there, I told her, setting the wine down. It's been there my whole life. This is just the first time I'm sending it back. Yara's question stayed with me. Are you prepared for that? The truth was, I'd been preparing my whole life. The house wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny cuts. As the wedding day grew closer, memories I had long suppressed started bubbling to the surface, each one a piece of evidence in a case I hadn't known I was building. I remembered my 8th grade play. I had a small role with 3 lines, and I'd practiced them for weeks until they were perfect. Blair, a 6th grader, was a tree in the chorus. My parents brought 2 cameras. Afterward, I found the developed photos on the kitchen counter. There were 24 pictures of Blair, beaming in her green felt costume, waving from the stage. There was one blurry, out-of-focus shot of me, half hidden behind another actor. When I asked my mom about it, she'd ruffled my hair and said, "Oh, honey, you were wonderful. But Blair just looked so cute, we couldn't help ourselves." I remembered my 16th birthday. I'd asked for a specific camera I'd been saving for. Instead, my parents gave me a sensible sweater and a gift certificate to a bookstore. "A camera is so expensive, sweetie," my dad had said, "and you're so good at saving. You can get it yourself soon." 2 months later, for Blair's 14th birthday, they bought her a pony. A literal pony. They'd leased a spot at a local stable and presented it to her at a surprise party. Their reasoning? It was just such a Blair thing to do. This wasn't about money. It was about worth. In their eyes, I was the sturdy, reliable sedan that got you from point A to point B without any fuss. Blair was the shiny convertible, impractical, expensive, but so much more fun to show off. They didn't invest in me because they assumed I didn't need it. They invested in Blair because her sparkle was a reflection of their own success as parents. My independence wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a convenience. The weight of it all was becoming unbearable. I was snapping at Nasir over little things, like the font on the place cards or the color of the napkins. He cornered me one night as I was hunched over my laptop, obsessively tweaking the seating chart. He knelt in front of me and gently took my hands. "Sienna, talk to me." This time I couldn't deflect. The lie was too heavy. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The phone call, the realtor's email, the $50,000 gift letter, the voicemail. I told him about the play and the pony, and the lifetime of feeling like an afterthought. He listened without interrupting, his expression hardening with each word. When I finished, my voice hoarse, he was silent for a long moment. He just held my hands, his grip firm and steady. "They lied to your face," he said, his voice low and furious. "They guilted you into paying for this whole wedding while they were buying your sister a house." Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry finally started to fall. "They don't see me, Nasir. They never have." "I see you," he said, his voice softening as he wiped a tear from my cheek. "And you don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them a graceful performance. You owe them nothing." His validation was like a dam breaking. It wasn't just my anger anymore. It was ours. He understood. He saw the injustice. He didn't tell me to forgive or forget. He told me I had a right to be angry. The next morning, the final guest list arrived in the mail from my mom. She had made a few additions in her neat, loopy handwriting. Tucked inside the envelope was a small, cream-colored note card. I pulled it out, my stomach twisting. It read, "Sienna, we are so proud of you for doing this on your own. You've always been our responsible girl. Can't wait for your big day. Love, Mom." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. It wasn't just a lie. It was a taunt. A final pat on the head for the good daughter who knew her place. I pinned the note to the corkboard above my desk, right next to a printout of my speech. It was the only motivation I needed. The note from my mother was the final piece of confirmation I needed. The plan, once a nebulous cloud of anger, solidified into something sharp and clear. The days leading up to the wedding were surreal. I moved through my final dress fitting, the menu tasting, and the endless logistics with a detached calm that unnerved everyone but Nasir. He knew it wasn't calm, it was the quiet before a storm. My final doubt, the tiny, hopeful part of me that thought maybe Blair really didn't know, was erased 3 days before the wedding. My cousin, Marley, called to confirm her flight details. Marley was 34, sharp-witted, and had always seen the family dynamics with a clarity that made my mother uncomfortable. "Hey, just landed," she said, the airport noise buzzing in the background. "So excited for Saturday. And hey, I heard the big news about Blair and Stefan, a whole house. That's amazing. Blair mentioned they're planning a huge housewarming party right after they get back from their trip to Italy." My blood ran cold. "Trip to Italy? Yeah, you know, their post-honeymoon, Marley said with a laugh. "Stefan's company is sending him. Must be nice. Anyway, she said your parents were absolute saints for helping them get the house. She was gushing." So Blair knew. She had known all along. This wasn't a surprise gift my parents were arranging behind her back. It was a conspiracy. She was an active, willing participant in the lie. She had smiled at my budget spreadsheets, listened to me fret about the cost of floral arrangements, and offered sympathetic noises, all while knowing she was about to be handed a $50,000 down payment and a trip to Italy. The betrayal was so complete it was almost elegant in its cruelty. That night I read my finished speech to Yara. We sat in my quiet apartment, the city lights twinkling outside the window. I read it from start to finish without stopping, my voice steady and unwavering. I detailed the financial strain, the secret down payment, the years of quiet disparities, and the final condescending note from my mother. When I finished, the silence was heavy. I looked up and saw that Yara was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. She didn't say it was too much. She didn't tell me to reconsider. She just got up, wrapped her arms around me, and held me tight. "You have every right," she whispered into my hair. "Every single right. Just don't forget what comes after. This is a choice you can't undo. I know, I said, my voice muffled against her shoulder. I'm not trying to fix it anymore. I'm just trying to end it. The day before the wedding was the rehearsal dinner. My family was on their best behavior, a perfect portrait of loving support. My dad made a toast about how proud he was of his 2 beautiful daughters. My mom fussed over my dress, telling everyone how I'd found such a bargain. It was a nauseating performance. After the dinner, Blair pulled me aside, her eyes shining with what looked like genuine emotion. She was holding a beautifully wrapped gift box. I wanted to give you this before all the craziness tomorrow, she said, her voice soft. I opened it. Inside was a gift certificate for a luxurious spa day for 2. For after the honeymoon, she explained, beaming. You and me. We never get to just hang out anymore. You've been working so hard, Sai. You deserve to be pampered. She hugged me, squeezing tight. You're the best sister ever, she whispered. For a terrifying second, I thought I was going to be sick right there in the restaurant parking lot. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She was offering me a $100 spa day as a token of her affection, a breadcrumb from the feast my parents had provided for her. It was salt in a wound so deep I could no longer feel the bottom. I hugged her back, my arms stiff, and forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. Thank you, Blair, I said, my voice dangerously even. This is so thoughtful. She pulled back, completely oblivious, her smile as bright and untroubled as ever. I love you, she said. I know, I replied. I watched her walk away to join Stefan, her laughter echoing in the cool night air. The last thread of hesitation I had, the final foolish flicker of sisterly sentiment, was extinguished. The stage was set, the audience was gathered, and I was ready for my performance. The wedding day arrived on a wave of perfect, sunny autumnal air. Everything looked exactly as I had planned. The garden venue was intimate and lovely, decorated with flowers I had arranged myself and fairy lights Nasir and I had spent an evening stringing through the trees. It was small, modest, and heartfelt, the very picture of a wedding planned by a sensible, independent daughter. I felt strangely serene getting ready. Yara was a calming presence, helping me with my dress and making sure I ate a few bites of a sandwich. When my mom and Blair came into the bridal suite, their faces were alight with excitement. Oh, Sienna, you look breathtaking, Mom gushed, her eyes misty. Just beautiful. Blair fussed with the train of my simple, elegant dress. See? You don't need a big, poofy princess gown to be a stunning bride. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I just smiled. The ceremony was short and sweet. When I walked down the aisle and saw Nasir waiting for me, his eyes full of love and unwavering support, the noise in my head went quiet for the first time in weeks. In that moment, standing with him, I knew I was making the right choice, in marrying him, and in everything that was to follow. We said our vows, the ones I'd actually written, and they were the truest words I'd ever spoken. The reception was held in the same garden, under a large open-sided tent. The atmosphere was warm and joyful. Guests mingled, laughing and sipping champagne. My parents floated through the crowd, accepting congratulations, the proud patrons of their daughter's lovely, budget-friendly wedding. They looked so pleased with themselves, so comfortable in their roles. During dinner, the traditional toasts began. Yara went first, telling a funny, sweet story about our college days that made me laugh for real. Nasir's best man followed with a heartfelt tribute to their friendship. Then, my father stood up. He cleared his throat, beaming, and raised his glass. To Sienna and Nasir, he began. Sienna, you have always made us so proud. You're smart, you're hardworking, and you've built a wonderful life for yourself. We are so thrilled to welcome Nasir into our family. We love you both. It was a perfect, generic, father of the bride speech. The guests applauded warmly. Then my mother stood, tapping her glass for attention. She looked directly at me, her expression a perfect blend of maternal love and gentle melancholy. "I just want to add something," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Seeing my eldest daughter get married is one of the happiest days of my life. Sienna, you and Nasir have created such a beautiful day, all on your own." As parents, we wish we could have done more to help, truly we do. She paused, letting the weight of her sacrifice settle over the room. But we've learned that love isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments like these. We are so proud of the responsible, incredible woman you've become. The guests nodded, their faces soft with sympathy. A few ants dabbed at their eyes. My mother had delivered her lines flawlessly. She sat down to a round of appreciative applause, squeezing my father's hand. She had just handed me the perfect opening. The DJ announced that the bride would now say a few words. A hush fell over the crowd. Nasir gave my hand a final, firm squeeze under the table. I stood up and walked to the microphone, my heart beating a slow, steady, deliberate rhythm. Every eye in the tent turned to me. I saw my parents, smiling expectantly. I saw Blair, looking radiant in her maid of honor dress. I saw all the relatives who had heard the broke tape, their faces full of warmth. I took a deep breath, clutching the note card with my speech on it, though I no longer needed it. I had memorized every word. "Thank you all so much for being here," I started, my voice clear and strong. "It means the world to Nasir and me to have you celebrate with us. I'd like to thank my new in-laws for welcoming me so warmly into their family, and I'd like to thank my wonderful husband, Nasir. I love you more than words can say." I smiled at him, and he smiled back, a silent promise passing between us. Then, I turned my gaze to my parents. "Before I thank my parents," I began, my voice shifting, losing its warmth and gaining a sharp, precise edge. "I want to share something I've been carrying. A lesson my parents taught me about family, finance, and honesty." A flicker of confusion crossed my mother's face. My father shifted in his seat. The guests leaned in, expecting a heartwarming anecdote. "My mother just said that love isn't measured in dollars, and she's right," I continued, my eyes locked on hers. "But honesty is. And it seems to be an expense my family can't afford. You see, when Nasir and I got engaged, my parents sat us down and told us that due to a severe financial strain, they couldn't help with the wedding. I was, of course, understanding. I took on a second job, and Nasir worked overtime. We paid for every single thing you see here today ourselves." I let that sink in, my gaze sweeping across the faces of my aunts and uncles, the ones I knew had heard the same story. I saw dawning comprehension on some of their faces. "I was so proud to do it," I said, my voice ringing with false sincerity. "So proud to be their responsible, independent daughter who never asks for too much." But then I discovered the real reason for their financial strain. It wasn't a tough year. It was a $50,000 down payment on a new house for my sister, Blair, and her husband, Stefan. A collective gasp went through the tent. The photographer, who had been circling the dance floor, froze mid-step. My mother's face had gone from confused to ashen. Her smile was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. Blair's hand flew to her mouth, and she looked at Stefan, her eyes wide with panic. He just stared at me, his charming facade crumbling. $50,000, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. A gift, they called it. Not a loan. A gift given in secret, while they were telling me they were just scraping by. They weren't just lying to me, they were lying to all of you, crafting a narrative of hardship to justify their choices. I held up the small, cream-colored note card my mother had sent me. Just last week, my mother sent me this note. It says, "We're so proud of you for doing this on your own." They weren't proud. They were relieved. Relieved that I was so easy to manage, so simple to dismiss. For my entire life, I have been the daughter who gets the praise, while my sister gets the pony, the car, the college tuition without loans, and now, a house. My voice didn't shake. I felt no tears. All the hurt had been burned away, leaving behind something hard and clear as diamond. I looked at Blair, whose face was now streaked with mascara. "And Blair, I want to thank you for your heartfelt wedding gift," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "A spa day. After you accepted a secret down payment for your house, a house you're planning to celebrate with a party after your post-honeymoon trip to Italy, you thought a spa day would be an appropriate gesture. It was so thoughtful." The silence in the tent was absolute, broken only by a few shocked whispers. Laurel's face had crumpled completely. She looked small and exposed, stripped of the matriarchal grace she wore like a shield. Blair was openly sobbing now, whispering Stefan's name like a mantra, a lifeline that couldn't save her. I smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time that night. "So yes, I would like to thank my parents. Thank you for teaching me that my worth in this family is conditional. Thank you for showing me that your love comes with a price tag, and I was never the preferred customer. This wedding was humble because honesty is expensive in my family." I placed the microphone back on the stand with a soft click. The sound echoed in the dead silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, my father, George, shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "Sienna, that's enough," he stammered, his voice cracking. "How dare you? How dare you embarrass your mother like this on your wedding day?" Before I could respond, a clear voice cut through the tension from the back of the room. It was my cousin, Marley. She stood up, her expression a mixture of shock and grim satisfaction. "She didn't embarrass anyone but you, Uncle George." Marley's words shattered the frozen tableau. A low murmur erupted through the guests as my father stared at her, speechless. My mother didn't even look up. She just covered her face with her hands. Blair, guided by Stefan, stumbled away from the head table and fled the tent, her sobs echoing behind her. The perfect family portrait had been torn to shreds. The reception ended in chaos. It didn't so much conclude as it disintegrated. Some guests left immediately, their faces tight with discomfort. Others clustered in small, whispering groups, shooting glances at my parents' table. My mother and father left without another word to me, hustled out by a few loyal relatives who glared in my direction as they passed. The wedding cake, Yara's beautiful gift, sat largely untouched. Nasir and I stayed until the last vendor had packed up. He held my hand the entire time, a silent, solid anchor in the wreckage I had created. As we drove away from the empty garden, the adrenaline that had sustained me for weeks finally began to fade, leaving a hollow, quiet ache in its place. "Are you proud of yourself?" Nasir asked gently, his eyes on the road. I thought about it for a moment, watching the city lights blur past the window. "Not proud," I said, my voice quiet. "I'm not proud of hurting them. But I'm finally heard, and I'm not sorry for that." The fallout was immediate and digital. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from the extended family group text. A civil war was being waged in iMessage. Some cousins and aunts defended me, Marley chief among them, pointing out the years of blatant favoritism. Others, my mother's sisters mostly, condemned me for my cruelty and lack of respect. I read the first few messages, then muted the conversation. I had said my piece. I didn't need to participate in the post-mortem. Blair blocked my number. I received a single vitriolic email from my father, calling me an ungrateful, vindictive child who had destroyed our family for attention. I deleted it without replying. My mother remained silent, a void where there was once constant, cloying communication. In the weeks that followed, the lines were drawn. Some relatives reached out with messages of support, sharing their own stories of feeling overlooked in favor of a sibling. Others sent emails dripping with disappointment, mourning the happy family they thought we were. The life I had known was fractured, the pieces rearranged into a new, starker reality. There was a before, and now there was an after. Nasir was my rock. He fielded calls from his own bewildered parents, explaining the situation with a calm loyalty that made me love him even more. He never once made me feel like I had done the wrong thing. He just held me when I was quiet and made me laugh when the silence got too heavy. A couple of months after the wedding, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in our mailbox. It wasn't addressed to us. It was for our neighbors, but the mail carrier had put it in our slot by mistake. The return address was my parents' house. It was an invitation. I stared at the elegant script, my heart giving a familiar, painful thud. You're invited to a housewarming for Blair and Stefan. I slid it into my neighbor's mailbox, my hands steady. They hadn't canceled the party. They hadn't uninvited people. They had just closed ranks, excised the dissenting voice, and pretended nothing had happened. They were moving on, rebuilding their perfect family image with the remaining compliant pieces. For a moment, a wave of desolate anger washed over me. They were getting away with it. But then, I looked at the front door of my own apartment, at the life Nasir and I were building, funded by our own hard work and built on a foundation of absolute honesty. I thought of the quiet peace in our home, free from performance and unspoken resentment. The revenge came at a cost. I had lost a sister, and the parents I thought I had. But I had gained myself. I was no longer the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who swallowed her disappointment with a grateful smile. I was a woman who had been pushed too far, who had found her voice and used it to speak the truth, no matter the consequences. I had paid the price for that truth knowingly, and I would do it again.
The first thing you learn as a Ford is how to smile. It's not a real smile, the kind that reaches your eyes. It's a performance, a carefully constructed curve of the lips that says, "Everything is perfect, we are perfect, and you are so lucky to be in our presence." I've been practicing it for 6 years. My name is Robin, I'm 31, and I've never been worse at it than I am today, standing in the middle of a party that is supposedly for my own daughter. My mother-in-law, Esther, organised the whole thing. At 59, she moves with the deliberate grace of a woman who has never been told no. The house is decorated in her signature palette of cream and gold, not the soft greens and blues I'd chosen for the nursery. The guests are her friends, her business contacts, and the sprawling branches of the Ford family tree. My husband, Damien, who is 33, is circulating through the crowd, accepting congratulations with that perfect Ford smile plastered on his face. He hasn't checked on me in an hour. 1 month ago, I gave birth to our daughter. The pregnancy was brutal. 9 months of relentless nausea and a final 6 weeks of mandated bed rest. Through it all, the Fords offered platitudes, not support. Esther sent articles about mind over matter, and Damien complained that my condition was stressing him out. When I finally held our baby girl, all 7 pounds of her, I named her Isla. It was the one thing that felt truly mine, just Isla, a quiet, beautiful name for a quiet, beautiful girl. Now, holding a glass of water I don't want, I watch Esther across the room. She's talking to a woman I don't recognise, someone with sleek dark hair and a confidence that seems to radiate off her. She looks to be about my age, maybe a year older. There's a familiarity in the way Esther touches the woman's arm, a shared conspiratorial glance that makes the hairs on my neck stand up. It's the kind of intimacy Esther has never once shown me. My sister Lacey materialises at my side. At 35, she's my opposite in every way, loud, fierce, and completely unimpressed by the Ford family's manufactured prestige. "You okay?" she murmurs, her eyes following my gaze. "You look like you're about to burn a hole through that woman's skull." "Who is she?" I ask, keeping my voice low. Lacey squints. "Don't know. Never seen her before. But Esther looks like the cat that got the cream." She's right. Esther is beaming, her smile for once looking genuine. Damien joins them, and my stomach clenches as he greets the woman with a warmth that feels like a punch to the gut. He hugs her. It's not a polite, formal hug. It's a real one, the kind he hasn't given me in years. The woman laughs, a sound that cuts through the polite chatter of the party, and Damien's face lights up. I feel a cold dread creeping up my spine. This party isn't for Isla. It's not even for me. It's a stage and I'm just a prop. The whole day has felt rehearsed, from the caterers who arrived with a menu Esther had approved without my input to the photographer, who only seemed to take pictures of the Ford side of the family. Just then, Esther picks up a silver spoon and gently taps it against a crystal glass. The room falls silent. All eyes turn to her. Damien moves to stand beside his mother, his hand resting on her shoulder. He glances at me, but his eyes are blank, distant. "Thank you all for coming," Esther begins, her voice smooth and practiced. "Today is such a special day. We are so blessed to welcome the newest member of the Ford family, a beautiful girl who will carry on our legacy." She pauses for effect, her gaze sweeping over the adoring faces. My heart is hammering against my ribs. I know, with a sickening certainty, that something is about to go terribly wrong. Esther's eyes find mine, and for a split second, I see a flicker of something triumphant, almost cruel. Then it's gone, replaced by the benevolent matriarch mask. She raises her glass. "I'd like you all to join me in officially welcoming our precious granddaughter, introducing our beloved Isla Kendall Ford." The name echoed in the sudden silence that followed. Isla Kendall Ford. It wasn't just a name. It was a declaration, a branding. And then the applause started. A polite, rolling wave of it from the Fords and their friends, all of them smiling at Esther as if she'd just unveiled a masterpiece. I looked at Damien. He was standing beside his mother, that perfect Ford smile stretched across his face. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and in them I saw no apology, no regret, only pride. He was proud of this moment, proud of his mother for hijacking our daughter's identity. He squeezed Esther's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a blade twisting in my chest. The woman with the dark hair, Kendall, it had to be Kendall Bell, Damien's high school sweetheart, was clapping too, a small knowing smirk playing on her lips. She was the ghost who had haunted the edges of my marriage for 6 years, and now they had given my daughter her name. They had taken the one pure thing I had and tainted it with her. My blood ran cold, but my hands were steady. Lacey shot me a look, her expression a mixture of fury and concern. I gave her the slightest shake of my head. I didn't need her to fight this battle for me. I had already fought it. The applause died down, and the room dissolved back into conversation. The new name passed around like a party favour. Isla Kendall, how lovely! Such a strong family name. No one seemed to notice or care that the baby's mother was standing frozen by the fireplace, a silent statue in the middle of her own life. They hadn't just renamed my daughter, they had erased me from the equation entirely. But they didn't know my secret. They saw me as the quiet wife, the pliable addition to their dynasty. They had no idea what I was capable of when pushed into a corner. My mind flashed back 2 weeks to the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway of the county registrar's office. Isla was just 2 weeks old, and I was supposed to be resting. Damien had been putting off filing the birth certificate paperwork, claiming he was too busy with work. "We'll get to it, Rob," he'd say, waving a dismissive hand. "It's not urgent." But I knew it was. I'd seen the way Esther's eyes lit up when she talked about family names. I'd heard Damien on the phone late one night, his voice low and intimate, saying, "Don't worry, Mum's handling it." So I called Lucas. Lucas Joseph has been my friend since college. He's 31, same as me, and a family law attorney. He met me at a coffee shop, his expression grim as I laid out my suspicions. "He hasn't signed anything yet?" Lucas asked, stirring his latte. "No." He keeps making excuses. "And you're her mother. You were there. Your name is on all the hospital records," he said, more to himself than to me. "You can file it yourself. As her mother, you have every legal right to register her birth. It's better if both parents are there, but it's not a strict requirement as long as you're married and he's listed as the father." The next day, he drove me to the government building. I held my sleeping daughter, wrapped tightly against my chest, the scent of her filling my senses and stealing my resolve. In a small, quiet room, a clerk handed me the official form. My hand trembled as I filled in the boxes. Mother's name, Robin Fuller. Father's name, Damien Ford. Child's name. I paused, took a deep breath and wrote it out in clear block letters. Isla Maren Fuller Ford. Maren was my grandmother's name. A strong, simple name for a woman who had raised 3 children on her own. Fuller was my name. The name I was born with, the one they were so eager for me to forget. I signed the bottom, the ink from the pen seeming so dark, so final. The clerk stamped it, made a copy, and handed me the official certificate. It felt heavier than a piece of paper. It felt like armour. Now, back in Esther's suffocatingly perfect living room, the memory gave me strength. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. They thought they had won. They thought I would just stand here and smile that hollow Ford smile. I took a deliberate step forward, away from the fireplace. The movement was small, but it drew a few eyes. Damien's smile faltered for a second. I walked to the central table, where the champagne flutes and untouched cake sat. I placed my purse down on the polished wood with a soft, definitive click. The sound cut through the low hum of conversation. Esther turned to me, her expression one of mild annoyance, as if I were a servant about to interrupt the festivities. "Robin, dear, is everything all right?" I met her gaze, and for the first time I didn't look away. I didn't shrink. I let her see the ice in my eyes. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing through the suddenly quiet room, "there's something you should see." I unclasped my purse, the metallic click unnaturally loud in the hushed room. My fingers found the folded document inside, its crisp edges a comfort. I pulled it out and unfolded it with deliberate slowness, smoothing the creases on the polished tabletop. The official seal of the county registrar's office was prominent at the top. Damien's cousin Tyrone was the closest. He leaned in, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read the name aloud, his voice a low murmur that still carried across the room. "Isla Maren Fuller Ford." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. It wasn't a name, it was a rebellion. The hyphen felt like a declaration of war. I watched Damien's face. The colour drained from it, leaving behind a waxy, stunned pallor. He stared at the paper, then at me, his mouth slightly agape. He looked like a child who had just been told magic wasn't real. But it was Esther's reaction I savoured. The benevolent matriarch mask shattered, falling away to reveal the raw, ugly fury beneath. Her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her lips thinned into a white line. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed, her voice dangerously low. Before I could answer, I saw a flash of movement. Damien's younger sister Martina, who was 27 and had always treated me with a cloying sweetness that never reached her eyes, leaned over and whispered something urgently to Kendall. Kendall just nodded, that infuriating smirk still in place. Martina then turned and practically fled the room, disappearing down the hallway. "This is a forgery," Esther declared, her voice rising. Some kind of sick, pathetic joke. "It's a legally filed, state-issued birth certificate," I said calmly, my gaze locked on hers. "I filed it myself 2 weeks ago." "You went behind my back?" Damien finally found his voice. It was choked with disbelief and betrayal. "You went behind our back?" "You were going behind mine," I countered, my tone even. "You and your mother decided to name my daughter after your ex-girlfriend. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I would just smile and accept it?" The air in the room grew thick with tension. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me, Damien, and Esther. This was not the polite, curated family drama they were used to. This was real. "You had no right," Esther's voice cracked with rage. "The Ford name is not something you get to dilute with your name." That was it. The final confirmation that I was, and always would be, an outsider. an incubator for the next generation of Fords, expected to contribute my body but not my identity. A cold fury, sharp and clean, settled in my bones. I stood up straighter. "I didn't marry into this family to disappear," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. It wasn't a shout, but every person in that room heard me. Neither did my daughter. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Damien's aunt, Freya, a woman of 58 who had always shown me a quiet kindness, stepped forward. "Esther Robin, perhaps we should discuss this privately," she said, her voice a placating balm. "This isn't the time or the place." But I wasn't interested in a private discussion. Private discussions in this family were where they wore you down, where they twisted your words and made you the villain. I had made my statement in public for a reason. I wanted witnesses. I picked up my purse. "Lacey," I said, not taking my eyes off Damien. "We're leaving!" Lacey was already moving, grabbing our coats from the closet by the door. She shot a venomous glare at Esther as she passed. I walked out of that room without a backward glance. I didn't wait for Damien to follow, to protest, to try and fix it with empty words. I walked past the stunned faces of his family, down the grand hallway, and out the front door into the cool evening air. The sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind me was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. As Lacey and I reached the car, I allowed myself one look back at the house. Through the large bay window, I could see the party frozen in disarray. And standing near the centre of it all was Kendall. She wasn't looking at the door I had just walked through. She was turned toward Esther, whose face was a mask of incandescent rage. Kendall's smirk was gone, replaced by a look of cool assessment. She leaned in close to Esther and whispered something. Even from this distance, I could almost hear the words, carried on the wind of my victory. "Told you she'd bite." The drive home was silent. Lacey gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, while I stared out the window at the blurred city lights. The adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, leaving behind a hollow, vibrating anger. We didn't go back to the house I shared with Damien. We went to Lacey's apartment, a small safe space that smelled like her, lavender and righteous indignation. She made tea while I sat on her worn sofa, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. Isla was with my mother for the night, a pre-planned arrangement that now felt like a stroke of divine intervention. "You know this isn't just about a name, right?" Lacey said, setting a steaming mug in front of me. "This was a power play. Esther's been planning it for years." I thought back to all the little cuts, the 1,000 paper cuts of being a Ford's wife. There was the time Damien told me the way I decorated our living room was nice, but not quite as timeless as the way Kendall did her parents' place. Or when Esther gave me a Ford family traditions binder for Christmas, a 3-inch thick monstrosity detailing everything from approved holiday menus to the correct way to address a thank you note. Every page felt like a test I was failing. "They've always been a unit," Lacey continued, sitting across from me. "Esther, Damien, and Kendall. It's weird. There was some scandal back in high school, something Esther supposedly smoothed over for Kendall. My friend who went to school with them said Esther practically paid for Kendall's first year of college. They're connected in a way that goes beyond Damien." Her words hung in the air, confirming a suspicion I'd long held but never wanted to voice. The bond wasn't just about Damien's lingering affection, it was a strategic alliance. When I finally got home after midnight, the house was dark and empty. Damien wasn't there. A small, vindictive part of me was glad. I didn't want to see his face, didn't want to hear his excuses. I walked through the quiet rooms, each one feeling like a foreign country. This wasn't my home. It was a Ford outpost where I was merely stationed. Lacey's words about their connection echoed in my mind. It wasn't enough to know they were allied against me. I needed to know why. I needed to know everything. I started in his study. His laptop was on the desk, left open. My heart hammered as I moved the mouse, waking the screen. His email was open. My eyes scanned the inbox, but it was the synced messages from his phone that caught my eye. A thread with Kendall. I clicked on it, my breath catching in my throat. The messages went back months. Flirtatious banter, inside jokes, and then the confirmation. A string of texts from 5 weeks ago, the week I had gone to stay with my mother because the doctor had ordered complete bed rest. Kendall, your place is so much better without all her stuff. Damien, told you it had potential. Make yourself at home. Kendall, don't have to tell me twice. Left a little something for you in your nightstand. See you tomorrow. He had a small condo in the city he kept for late nights at the office. She had been staying there, with him, while I was alone, pregnant, and terrified of losing our baby. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it almost didn't feel real. It was the kind of thing that happens in movies, not to you. Fueled by a white-hot rage, I started searching the room. I wasn't the quiet wife anymore. I was an archaeologist digging through the ruins of my marriage. I pulled open drawers, sifted through papers, looking for anything else. His desk was old, a heavy mahogany heirloom from his grandfather. As I slammed the bottom drawer shut in frustration, I heard a faint rattle, something shifting inside the wood. I knelt, running my fingers along the inside of the drawer frame. Bare. A small, almost invisible notch. I pressed it, and a thin panel at the back of the drawer clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. My hands trembled as I reached inside. The first thing I pulled out was a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Love notes. In Kendall's looping, dramatic script. They were recent. Beneath them was a thick manila envelope. It wasn't sealed. I pulled out the documents inside. The letterhead was from a prestigious family law firm. My eyes scanned the title on the first page, and the air left my lungs in a single silent gasp. It was a draft. A petition for Damien to file for full custody of our daughter. Attached to the back, on a sticky note in Esther's sharp, precise handwriting, were 2 words, just in case. I stared at the custody petition, the words blurring through a haze of pure, undiluted rage. Just in case. In case of what? In case I didn't play along. In case I fought back. This wasn't a recent development. This was a contingency plan, drafted and waiting. They had never intended for me to be a mother on my own terms. I was just the vessel. My grief for my marriage was gone, burned away by the sheer, calculated cruelty of it all. I took out my phone, and with hands that were now perfectly steady, I photographed everything. The custody papers, Esther's note, every single one of Kendall's letters, the text messages on Damien's laptop. I created a digital arsenal, each image a bullet. The next morning, I didn't wait for Damien to come home and lie to my face. I made my first move. I selected a few of the most damning pieces of evidence. A photo of Kendall's note about staying at the condo, a screenshot of Damien's affectionate reply, and one of the more recent love letters. I didn't send them to everyone. That would be messy. I sent them to 2 people. The first was Tyron, Damien's cousin. At 36, he was older and had a reputation for being the family's moral compass, a trait Esther found endlessly irritating. The second was Freya, Damien's kind aunt. I knew they were the only 2 who valued integrity over the pristine Ford image. I attached the photos to a simple email with no subject line and no text. The evidence would speak for itself. The fallout was faster than I could have imagined. The Fords had a standing family gathering every month at their lake house, a tradition I'd always dreaded. This month's was scheduled for the following weekend. I didn't go, of course. I stayed home with Isla, my phone silent on the counter beside me. I didn't need to be there to know what was happening. Lacey called me that evening. "You are a legend," she said, her voice giddy. "My friend who caters for them just sent me a novel's worth of texts." Apparently, Tyron showed up, walked straight up to Damien, and asked him if he had anything to say about Kendall. According to Lacey's source, Damien had tried to play it off, but Tyron wasn't having it. He pulled out his phone and showed the pictures to anyone who would look. A screaming match erupted. Tyron called Damien a spineless cheat. Damien called him a traitor. Esther tried to intervene to smooth it all over with her usual blend of condescension and authority, but the damage was done. Freya, after seeing the evidence herself, simply picked up her purse, walked over to Tyron and said, "Let's go. I'll drive you home." Then she walked out, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Esther's carefully constructed empire was beginning to crack. For the first time, her authority had been publicly challenged and ignored. But the most interesting part of the story, Lacey told me, was Martina's reaction. Damien's younger sister, who had always been Esther's little shadow, apparently just stood there, watching the whole thing unfold with a strange, calculating look on her face. She didn't rush to defend Damien. She didn't comfort her mother. She just watched. It seemed the perfect family image was one she was starting to question too. A few days later, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach dropped. It was Kendall. She looked furious, her face tight and her eyes flashing. I opened the door, blocking the entrance with my body. "What do you want?" "You need to stop this," she snapped, trying to push past me. I held my ground. "Stop what? Telling the truth? You're ruining everything," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You sent those pictures." "You're trying to tear his family apart." "His family did a fine job of that on their own," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "They just needed someone to hold up a mirror." She glared at me, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. This wasn't the cool, confident woman from the party. This was someone who was losing control. "You have no idea what you're messing with, Robin," she said, her voice trembling with a rage that felt deeply personal. "This is bigger than you. You need to undo the damage, now." I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. She and my husband and his mother had conspired to steal my child's name, erase my identity, and prepare to take her from me, and I was the one who had to undo the damage? "No," I said simply. "I don't think I will." I started to close the door, but she stuck her foot in the frame. "You think this is a game?" she snarled. "You think you've won?" "You have no idea what's coming." I looked her straight in the eye. "Let me guess. A custody battle. Don't worry. I've already seen the paperwork." Her face went pale. The last of her composure crumbled. She finally knew she wasn't dealing with the quiet, accommodating wife anymore. She was dealing with the woman who had read her love letters and was prepared to burn the whole world down. I slammed the door in her face. I half expected her to start pounding on the door, but there was only silence. I leaned against it, my heart racing, not from fear, but from a grim sense of finality. The lines had been drawn. The game she'd warned me about had already begun. A week passed, a tense, quiet week. Damien sent a few pathetic texts. "Can we talk?" And, "This has gone too far, Robin," which I ignored. He didn't dare come to the house. He knew what he'd find. Not his meek wife, but a woman with a folder full of evidence and nothing left to lose. Then one afternoon, there was a knock. Not the frantic banging I expected from Kendall, but a calm, measured rap. It was Damien. He stood on the porch, looking tired and diminished. "I'm not here to fight," he said before I could speak. "Kendall is here. She wants to talk to you. We both do." He stepped aside, and Kendall emerged from behind him. She looked different. The anger was gone, replaced by a brittle, almost unnerving composure. I let them in. Not for them, but for me. I wanted this to be over, and I wanted it to happen on my territory. We sat in the living room I had decorated, the one he'd once criticised. He and Kendall took the sofa. I took the armchair opposite them, creating a physical barrier. "I was never angry that you existed, Kendall," I began, deciding to control the narrative from the start. "I was angry that you all thought I would accept being second place in my own marriage, that I would let you name my child like a placeholder." Kendall didn't flinch. She just watched me with those cool, assessing eyes. "This was never about you being second," she said, her voice flat. "It was about securing the family legacy." Damien shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Kendall, maybe we don't need to—" "No, Damien," she cut him off, her gaze still locked on me. "She started this. She deserves to know what's at stake." She placed a hand on her stomach, a deliberate theatrical gesture. "I'm pregnant?" The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I looked at Damien. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his hands, the picture of a pathetic cornered man. Of course she was. This was their checkmate. Another Ford heir, this one untainted by a mother with the wrong last name. It's Damien's, she added, as if there were any doubt. A year ago, this news would have shattered me. Now it just felt clarifying. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the ultimate explanation for their desperation, for the custody papers, for everything. So this was the plan all along, I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Replace the disobedient wife and baby with a new, more compliant model. It's not about replacement, Kendall said. It's about tradition, legacy. Something you've never understood. I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the first time I'd smiled in days. You're right, I don't understand, but I do understand the law. I leaned forward, my eyes on Damien now. You were so wrapped up in your traditions, you forgot about the legal realities. You were so focused on your past with her, I gestured to Kendall, that you made her your mistress, a fun little secret. But me? I let the question hang in the air, watching the flicker of fear in his eyes. I was the one you stood with in front of a judge. I was the one you signed a contract with. I was his name on every damn legal form that matters. The mortgage, the insurance policies, the tax returns. I stood up, the conversation over. Check the signed marriage license, Damien. My name is right there next to yours. And in this state, that makes me more than just a wife. It makes me your legal partner. It means half of everything you think is yours is actually ours. The colour drained from his face. He finally understood. This wasn't just about a baby's name anymore. It was about his entire life. Kendall stood up, her composure finally cracking. You can't do this. I already have, I said, walking toward the door and opening it. Now get out of my house. They left. 2 days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. It wasn't divorce papers. It was an emergency injunction filed by Esther Ford on behalf of her son. It questioned the paternity of my child. The injunction was Esther's last desperate gambit, a public, humiliating attempt to delegitimize me and my daughter. Lucas read through the filing, his expression a mixture of disgust and professional calm. This is a Hail Mary, he said, tossing the papers onto his desk. It's baseless and malicious. But a judge will likely order a paternity test just to officially close the door on it. Are you okay with that? I'm fine with it, I said. Let them have their test. Let them pay for it. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. The DNA test was a simple, sterile affair. A cheek swab for Isla and Damien in a quiet lab. The results were sent directly to the court. There was never any doubt, but seeing the official document confirming Damien's paternity with 99.9% certainty was another small, grim victory. In the courtroom, Esther sat behind Damien, a pillar of righteous fury. Kendall was nowhere to be seen. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, looked over the paternity results and then at the injunction papers. The results confirm Mr. Ford is the biological father, she stated, her tone flat. She then turned her attention to the matter of the name. As for the child's registered name, the birth certificate was filed legally and properly by the child's mother within the state-mandated time frame. There are no grounds to amend it without the consent of both parents. Esther made a small, choked sound, but the real blow came from an unexpected source. Lucas had submitted a sworn affidavit from a witness. The judge read it. I have a statement here from a Ms. Freya Lucas, she said, looking over her glasses at Damien. She attests to witnessing Ms. Kendall Bell at your private condominium on multiple occasions during the final weeks of your wife's high-risk pregnancy. Is this correct, Mr. Ford? Damien froze. He shot a panicked look back at his mother. The judge's question wasn't legally about the affair, but it painted a clear, damning picture of his character for the court. He mumbled something incoherent. I'll take that as a yes, the judge said, her voice laced with ice. Case dismissed. It was over. Esther's lawsuit had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly, officially documenting Damien's infidelity in a court record. I met him in the hallway outside the courtroom. Esther was already gone, storming away in a cloud of expensive perfume and impotent rage. Damien just stood there, looking utterly lost. "You let them do this," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of 6 years of suppressed anger. "You let them question who her father was. You let them name her at that party like I wasn't even alive." He had the decency to look ashamed. "Robin, I never wanted—" "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. I pulled a folded set of papers from my bag. Not a petition, not a draft. The real thing. "This is your tradition now, Damien. Losing everything that mattered because you didn't have the spine to stand up for it." I placed the divorce papers in his hand. His fingers closed around them reflexively. He looked down at them, then back up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, belated horror. He was finally realizing that the game was over, and he had lost. I walked away without another word. I didn't look back. That evening, I was at Lacey's apartment, packing the last of the things I'd stored there, when my phone rang. It was Lucas. "You are not going to believe this," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I just got a call from a colleague over at the State Revenue Department." "Okay." Apparently, someone filed an anonymous tip about financial irregularities in a Ford family trust, a trust that Esther manages. My heart skipped a beat. Lacey's words from weeks ago echoed in my head. Esther practically paid for Kendall's first year of college. "The tip was very specific," Lucas continued. "It alleged that funds designated for family members' education and welfare were being misappropriated, funneled to a third party, not listed as a beneficiary for years. It included account numbers and transfer dates." I sank onto a packing box, a slow smile spreading across my face. I thought of Martina, standing silently at the lake house, watching her mother's world begin to crumble, the quiet, overlooked daughter who had been manipulated her entire life. "My colleague said they've opened a full audit," Lucas said. "Esther Ford is about to have a very, very bad year." Isla's first birthday cake was a mess of smashed frosting and tiny fingerprints. She sat in her high chair, a smudge of pink on her nose, gleefully pounding her little fists into what was left of the confection. The sound of her happy babbling filled my small, sunny apartment, a sound that was entirely my own. The peace was so profound, so complete, that it felt like a physical presence in the room. Lacey sat across the table from me, a wide grin on her face as she snapped another picture on her phone. "Look at her! A tiny, sugar-fueled demolition expert." I laughed, a real easy laugh that came from my chest. "She comes by it honestly." "Speaking of demolition," Lacey said, lowering her phone and taking a sip of her coffee, I heard the final numbers from the Ford auditor in. "Tyron called me." I wiped a bit of frosting from Isla's cheek. "And?" "Esther has to pay back nearly 2 decades of unauthorized distributions from the trust, with interest and penalties. It's a fortune. She had to sell the lake house and a good chunk of her stock portfolio." Lacey's smile was sharp. "Turns out she'd been funding Kendall's entire life since high school. Tuition, apartments, cars, all with money that was supposed to be for her actual children, like Martina." The anonymous tip. It was Martina. It had to be. She had watched her mother champion a rival for years, only to discover she was also paying for it with her own inheritance. It wasn't just revenge. It was reclamation. "At family gatherings, what's left of them, they call you icy now," Lacey added, her eyes twinkling. "They say you're cold and calculating." "Let them think whatever they want," I said, lifting Isla from her high chair and settling her on my hip. She smelled like sugar and baby shampoo. "They only call a woman calculating when she's done something they couldn't predict." The divorce had been finalised 6 months ago. Damien fought not for me, but for the assets. My name on that marriage licence, however, was an ironclad contract. He was forced to split everything, his pride taking a bigger hit than his bank account. He'd tried to reconcile once, showing up at my door with a pathetic bouquet of flowers and talking about second chances. I told him my second chance was the life I was living now and closed the door. Kendall had her baby, a boy. But without Esther's influence and financial backing, the Ford legacy was just a tarnished name. She stayed long enough to secure a generous child support agreement from Damien, and then left town. She was a pragmatist, not a martyr. She had no interest in a fallen dynasty. Damien was now a man adrift, paying for 2 households and belonging to neither. He saw Isla on his designated weekends, treating her with a kind of baffled distance, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. My phone buzzed with a text. It was a picture from Freya, showing a beautiful sunset over the ocean. She and Tyrone had taken a trip to the coast. They were the only Fords I still spoke to. They had quietly extricated themselves from Esther's orbit, rebuilding their lives on their own terms. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about Isla's new tooth, or the book Freya was reading. We talked about the future. I held my daughter close, her little body warm against mine. I looked around my home, a place filled with my colours, my choices, my peace. It wasn't a mansion built on a foundation of secrets and expectations. It was a small apartment built on love and resilience. I had walked out of that welcome party a year ago, and I hadn't stopped walking. Let them choke on their traditions. I named her with love, and that love carries my name.
The first thing I noticed was the smell, or rather, the lack of it. Every year, from the 1st of December on, my house smells like pine needles and cinnamon. It's a scent I cultivate, a signal that Christmas has arrived in the Jensen home. But when I walked in from my grocery run, all I smelled was lemon-scented floor cleaner and the cold, sterile scent of nothing. My house was naked. For 15 years, my husband Brian and I have hosted his family's Christmas. I'm Remy, by the way. I'm 39, and for most of my adult life, Christmas has been my thing. Not just a holiday, but a sacred tradition. A living museum of our family's history, all curated by me. But the living room was bare. The corner where our 9-foot tree always stood was empty. A faint circle of ghost scratches on the hardwood floor, the only evidence it was ever there. The mantelpiece, usually groaning under the weight of fresh garland and the stockings I sewed myself, was a blank slab of white-painted wood. The boxes I'd spent all weekend bringing down from the attic were gone. All of them. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I walked through the downstairs in a daze, my grocery bag still hanging from my wrist. Every surface was wiped clean. The little ceramic village my son, Lance, helped me set up every year? Gone. The ridiculous glitter-bombed angel my daughter Sophia made in kindergarten that we always put on the entryway table vanished. My breath caught in my throat when I realized the star was gone. It was a clumsy, hand-carved thing my grandfather made from a piece of wood from his old barn before he passed away. It was splintery and imperfect and the most precious thing I owned. Panic began to bubble up, hot and acidic. Had we been robbed? But the TV was still there. The laptops were on the counter. No, this wasn't a robbery. This was an invasion. On the kitchen island, propped against the fruit bowl, was a single folded piece of notepaper. The handwriting was my mother-in-law, Deborah's familiar loopy cursive. Remy, it read. Gianna needed some help getting set up in her new house. We thought it would be best if she hosted this year. I took the decorations to get her started. See you on the 25th. I read it 3 times. There was no apology, no explanation, just a statement of fact, as if she'd borrowed a cup of sugar. She took my grandfather's star. She took my daughter's angel. She took 15 years of our memories and handed them to my sister-in-law, Gianna, like a party favor. The front door opened and Brian walked in, whistling. He was 41, 2 years my senior, and had a talent for remaining blissfully unaware of any tension until it was screaming in his face. He stopped short when he saw my expression. Whoa, what's wrong? He asked, dropping his briefcase. I just held up the note. He scanned it, his face unreadable. Oh, right. he said, shrugging off his coat. Mom mentioned they might do that. Gianna's new place is huge. It'll look great. The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. They might do that? Brian, they came into our house and took everything, without asking. They didn't need to ask, Remy. It's just family helping family, he said, heading for the fridge. Mom said Gianna was feeling overwhelmed. This helps her out. Helps her out? My voice was dangerously quiet. She took my grandfather's star, Brian. He sighed, the sound of a man bracing for a fight he couldn't be bothered to have. Don't be dramatic, it's just stuff. We can get new stuff. That's when something inside me broke. The shock, the violation, the casual dismissal from my own husband, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of pain. I felt a sob clawing its way up my throat, hot and ragged. For a second, I almost let it out. I almost gave them the satisfaction of the hysterical, emotional wife they so clearly expected me to be. They want me to cry. They want me to call Gianna, begging for my children's handmade ornaments back. Let them. Let them wonder what happens when I don't. The sob died in my chest, replaced by an unnerving, icy calm. I turned away from Brian, leaving him standing by the open refrigerator. I walked past the empty living room, down the hall, and into my small craft room. It was the one room they hadn't touched. I sat down at my desk, pulled my laptop toward me, and opened my email. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicking sounds echoing in the silent house. A new message. To the entire Jensen family. Subject, this year's Christmas update. I didn't scream or accuse, I simply stated the facts. The email was a masterpiece of cold, hard truth. Dear family, I began. I came home this afternoon to find my house has been emptied of all our Christmas decorations. A note from Deborah informed me they were taken to Gianna's new home to help her out. To be clear, this was done without my knowledge or consent. Among the items taken were the hand-sewn stockings for my children, every ornament Lance and Sophia have ever made, and the wooden star my grandfather carved for me before he died. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keys. I attached a single photo to the email, one I'd taken last Christmas of Sophia, then 8 years old, carefully placing her glitter-bombed kindergarten angel on the entryway table. Her face was pure joy. For 15 years, it has been my privilege to host our family Christmas. Since the role of host, along with my family's most cherished possessions, has been given to Gianna, I want to be clear. Brian, the children, and I will not be attending Christmas at her home this year. We will be making our own arrangements. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. I signed it, Sincerely, Remy, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. The silence in the house lasted for exactly 93 seconds. Then my phone, sitting on the desk beside me, began to vibrate. It didn't stop. A cascade of replies flooded the family group chat. Brian's Aunt Carol was first. Deborah was just trying to help. Gianna has that big new house. It's a lot of pressure. A distant cousin. Wait, they took your stuff without asking? Then Brian stormed into the room, his face red. What the hell did you do? My mother just called me, hysterical. You sent an email? I sent a clarification, I said, my voice level. I refused to let him see me shake. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. You've embarrassed my mother and my sister. They embarrassed themselves when they entered my home and stole from my children, I shot back. Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. It was my best friend, Amy. She stood on the porch holding a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses, her expression grim. I got the email. I broke the speed limit. She pushed past Brian without a word and wrapped me in a hug. Tell me everything, she whispered, setting the wine down on the counter with a thud. While I recounted the story, Brian paced in the background, muttering about how I was making things difficult. Amy just stared at him. Are you serious right now, Brian? Your wife's family heirlooms were stolen by your mother, and you're worried about things being difficult? He just shook his head and retreated upstairs, unwilling to face two of us. He's always been like this, I said, sinking onto a kitchen stool. He lets his mom and sister walk all over him, and by extension, me. Not anymore, Amy said, pouring 2 generous glasses of wine. So what's the plan? Because making our own arrangements sounds deliciously vague and full of potential. A bitter laugh escaped me. I don't have a plan. I just know I can't sit at Gianna's table and watch her show off my grandfather's star on her tree. My eyes welled up. Do you remember that Christmas 10 years ago, when Douglas had his heart scare? Amy nodded, her eyes softening. I remember. Deborah was a wreck, and Gianna locked herself in her room crying about how Christmas was ruined. And I cooked the entire dinner for 20 people, wrapped every last gift, and drove back and forth from the hospital so Brian could be with his dad, I said, the memory still sharp. Lance was only 3, and I was pregnant with Sophia. I held this family together with tape and sheer force of will. I saved their Christmas. And this is how they thank me. So we'll show them what Christmas is like without you, Amy said, her eyes gleaming. We won't just make our own arrangements. We'll host our own Christmas. A better one. The real one. The idea was insane. It was perfect. A small, defiant smile touched my lips for the first time all day. Just then, my laptop pinged with a new email notification. It wasn't part of the family reply all chain. It was a direct message from Gianna. My stomach twisted as I opened it. The message was short, devoid of any greeting or warmth. I can't believe you sent that email. Mom was just trying to make things easier for everyone, but I guess that doesn't matter. You'll always find a way to make things about you. You'll always find a way to make things about you. I stared at Gianna's words on the screen, a bitter laugh bubbling in my chest. She had no idea how right she was. Fine. If they thought I wanted to make things about me, I would. I'd make this Christmas entirely, unapologetically about me, my children, and the life I had built. Okay, Operation Reclamation Christmas is a go, Amy announced 2 days later from my living room floor. She was surrounded by stacks of elegant cream-colored cardstock and a calligraphy pen she'd insisted on buying. Gianna is going for big, flashy, and stolen. We go for small, intimate, and authentic. Brian was making himself scarce, leaving for work early and coming home late, offering clipped, one-word answers to any questions. He was hoping if he ignored the problem long enough, it would simply vanish. He didn't understand that I was the problem now. The invitations can't be digital, I said, sorting through a list of names. No group texts, no emails. They have to be hand-delivered or passed through friends. It creates a sense of conspiracy, Amy grinned. I love it. Who's on the A-list for this rebellion? We made our list carefully. Not just my friends, but Brian's younger cousins who always felt bulldozed by Deborah. His uncle who'd once quietly told me my pot roast was better than his wife's. People on the periphery, the ones who saw the family dynamics for what they were, but never had the leverage to say anything. The food, though, was a problem. I couldn't cook for 30 people and host at the same time. My mind kept circling back to one person. The one person I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. My sister, Tatum. Tatum is 4 years older than me, a professionally trained chef who runs a successful catering business in the next town over. We'd had a falling out after our mother died, a stupid, painful fight over a piece of furniture that was never really about the furniture. Pride had kept us apart ever since. My hand trembled as I found her number in my contacts. She answered on the second ring. Hello? Her voice was the same, brisk, no nonsense. Tatum, it's Remy. Silence. For a long moment, I thought she'd hung up. Remy, she finally said, her tone flat. It's been a while. I know, listen, I need a favor, a professional one. I'm willing to pay full price, of course. I explained the situation in clipped, emotionless sentences. The decorations, the note, Gianna's email. I left out the part about how much it hurt, focusing only on the logistics. Another long pause. So let me get this straight, she said, and I could hear the faint hint of a smile in her voice. Your monster-in-law stole your Christmas, and now you want to burn hers to the ground with a rival party? Something like that, I admitted, my cheeks flushing. And you want my food to be your weapon of mass destruction? You make a mean beef Wellington. She laughed, a real throaty laugh that I hadn't heard in years. All right, little sister, I'm in. Send me the date and the head count. This sounds like my kind of petty. Hanging up, I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. Later that night, I scrolled through social media, a morbid curiosity pulling me to Gianna's page. It was even worse than I'd imagined. She'd posted a dozen photos. There was my grandfather's star, perched atop a tree that was far too pristine. There were Lance's lopsided clay ornaments, hanging awkwardly next to perfectly coordinated glass baubles. There was a selfie of her and Deborah, smiling, with a caption that read, "So excited to finally host Christmas in our new home. Making new traditions is so important. So blessed to have my mom's help in making everything perfect." Family first. Hostess with the mostess. New beginnings. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Making new traditions. They weren't just borrowing my things, they were erasing me. I shut my phone off, needing to focus on my own plan. I wanted to incorporate some of our old photos, maybe create a slideshow of Christmases past. I went to the old desktop computer in the craft room, the one that held 15 years of our digital lives. I started digging through folders of holiday pictures, looking for the best shots of the kids with their grandparents, of our family when it still felt whole. As I clicked through nested folders of backups from an old hard drive, my mouse hovered over a strangely named directory I didn't recognize. It was in a folder from 2019, a year before Gianna even started building her new house. The label was simple, almost clinical. GJ, Plans, 2019. Probably one of Brian's work things, I thought. GJ could be a client, but something made me click on it. The folder was password protected, odd. On a hunch, I typed in the name of Gianna's childhood dog. Access granted. The folder opened and my blood ran cold. The folder contained a handful of documents, saved emails, a Word document of notes, and a spreadsheet. It was a meticulously crafted multi-year plan. Gianna's plan. To take over Christmas. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision Deborah made to help her overwhelmed daughter. This was a long con. The emails exchanged between Gianna and Deborah 3 years ago were chilling. "Mom, we have to start laying the groundwork now," Gianna had written in one. "Remy has everyone thinking she's the perfect hostess. We need to gently point out the cracks. How she's always so tired. How the kids are getting a bit old for all the cutesy homemade stuff." Deborah's replies were just as venomous, cloaked in concern. "You're right, dear. She does try too hard." It's almost desperate. We'll just start suggesting that maybe it's becoming too much for her. For her own good, of course. There were notes detailing a timeline. Year 1, plant seeds of doubt about my stress levels. Year 2, suggest a potluck to lighten Remy's load, thereby diminishing her role. Year 3, the takeover. It was all there, a blueprint for my own obsolescence. My hands were shaking. I felt sick. This wasn't just about decorations. This was a calculated campaign to undermine and replace me at the center of the family I had poured my heart into. Then I saw another email chain, one that made the air leave my lungs. It was from 6 months ago. Brian had forwarded our joint bank statements and investment portfolio summary to his mother and Gianna. I remembered the conversation vividly. I had told him explicitly not to. We were applying for a home equity line of credit for some renovations, and Deborah had been nosy, asking about our finances under the guise of offering advice. "It's our private information, Brian," I'd said. "They're my family, Remy. We don't have secrets," he'd replied dismissively. He'd done it anyway. He'd sent our private financial life to the two women who were actively plotting against me. The betrayal was so profound, it was almost silent. It wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion, but a quiet, structural collapse of the trust I thought we had. The next morning, while Brian was in the shower, I logged into our online banking. With a few clicks, I transferred half of our joint savings, my half, the money I had brought into this marriage from the sale of my grandfather's house, into a new, separate account under my name only. It wasn't revenge, it was survival. Later that day, Amy came over, a file folder in her hand and a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She'd been doing some digging of her own, calling a few of the more gossipy cousins. "You are not going to believe this," she said, spreading some printed-out social media comments on the table. "Remember your famous gingerbread recipe? The one from your grandmother?" I nodded. "Well, apparently, for the last 5 years, Gianna has been telling people that you stole it from a magazine and are just passing it off as a family recipe. She told cousin Sarah that you were desperate to seem authentic. It was all part of the plan. Every little jab, every passive-aggressive comment, it was all groundwork. They'd been chipping away at my foundation for years, and I'd been too busy trying to hold everything together to even notice. But the final blow, the one that shattered everything, came from a single overlooked detail in Gianna's meticulous notes. A short entry under the heading, Logistics, Final Phase. It read, "Talk to B about getting a key. He can help move boxes while R is at her weekly grocery run. Tuesday AM is best." B. Brian. He hadn't just known about it. He hadn't just been complicit. He had helped them. He had used his key to let his mother and sister into our home. He had watched them pack up our children's memories. He had probably helped carry the boxes to their car. That night when Brian came home, he didn't find me waiting with a hot meal. He found me on the couch, laptop open, scrolling through Amazon. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys on the counter. "What's for dinner?" "I'm not sure what you're having," I said without looking up at him. "But I'm ordering pizza for me and the kids." He frowned, sensing the shift in the air. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, finally meeting his gaze, my own eyes cold and empty, "that you're no longer authorized to make purchases on this account." I clicked the mouse. A notification popped up on the screen. "You have successfully removed Brian Jensen from your Amazon Prime household." His face went from confused to angry. "Remy, what the hell is this? It's just an Amazon account." "No, Brian," I said, standing up. "It's not just an Amazon account. It's a household, and you broke the terms of service." The week before Christmas became a silent war. Brian started sleeping in the guest room. We moved around each other like ghosts in our own home, the space between us charged with everything unsaid. He didn't dare ask about the Amazon account again. He knew I knew. He just didn't know how much. Meanwhile, my reclamation Christmas was gaining a life of its own. The handwritten invitations had worked their magic. RSVPs were trickling in, not through texts, but through quiet phone calls and whispered confirmations at the grocery store. Brian's younger cousins confirmed they'd be there. My neighbor, who had always admired my decorations, asked if she could bring her famous mulled wine. It was becoming less of a party and more of a quiet rebellion. Tatum was my secret weapon. She'd taken to her role with a kind of savage glee I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. She wasn't just catering, she was co-conspiring. "I have a surprise for you," she said over the phone one afternoon. "Do you remember Gianna's husband, Jose?" I vaguely recalled him as a quiet, perpetually tired-looking man who worked in finance and seemed to fade into the wallpaper at family events. "Well," Tatum continued, a sly smile in her voice, "it turns out his firm is one of my biggest corporate clients. We have a great working relationship. I may have mentioned to him that I was catering a small private Christmas Eve event." "Tatum, what did you do?" "I just told him it was for my sister, who was having a tough holiday. He asked for the details. He seemed very interested. He said he'd be there." The implication hung in the air. Jose was abandoning his wife's grand debut to attend mine. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. My kindness, the very quality Gianna and Deborah had twisted into a weakness, was now my greatest asset. For 15 years, I had remembered birthdays, sent sympathy cards, and listened patiently to endless stories about gallbladder surgeries and ungrateful children. I had built a reservoir of goodwill, drop by drop, and now I was finally drawing from it. People weren't coming to my party just for me. They were coming because they were tired of Deborah's iron-fisted control and Gianna's desperate need for validation. The house, however, was still painfully bare. We'd bought a new tree, a lovely Fraser fir, but we had nothing to put on it. The emptiness was a constant glaring reminder of what had been taken. One evening, Sophia came downstairs, her 9-year-old face clouded with a sadness that broke my heart. "Mommy," she whispered, her lip trembling, "where's my sparkly angel, the one I made for the table?" I knelt and pulled her into a hug, my own throat tightening. "It's at Aunt Gianna's house right now, sweetie. She borrowed it." "But it's mine," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I want it back for our tree." I held her tight, stroking her hair. The rage I felt was so pure, so cold, it could have cut glass. This was their biggest miscalculation. They thought they were taking my things. They didn't realize they were stealing from my children. "You'll see it soon, baby," I promised, my voice fierce. "I promise." That night, after the kids were in bed, I took a single photo. I found a small snow globe I'd bought at a gift shop years ago, one they had missed. It depicted a tiny, peaceful house covered in snow. I placed it on the bare mantelpiece, the sole decoration in the entire room. I snapped a picture and posted it to my rarely used Instagram account. I didn't tag anyone. The caption was simple: "The real Christmas is coming home to us." Within an hour, it had been screenshotted and sent through the family grapevine. It was a declaration of intent, a warning shot. The message was clear: you can take the decorations, but you can't take the spirit. You can't take my home. My Instagram post landed like a well-aimed snowball. The fallout was immediate. Amy, my ever-reliable source of intel, started forwarding me texts. "Is Remy having people over on Christmas Eve too?" One cousin wrote to another. "Gianna's invite said 7 p.m., but Remy's just says evening. Maybe we can do both." The panic must have set in at Gianna's show home because my phone rang 2 days later. It was Deborah. "Remy," she said, her voice tight with forced pleasantry, "I'm hearing some confusing things. Are you having a little get-together on Christmas Eve?" "We're having a quiet evening at home," I replied, my tone placid. "Well, some of the family seem to think they're invited. It's causing a bit of a scheduling conflict with Gianna's party. You know, the family party?" "I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said. And before she could reply, I added, "I have to go, Deborah. I'm baking," and hung up. The next confrontation was with Brian. He cornered me in the kitchen that night. his face a mixture of anger and desperation. The silent treatment was no longer working for him. "This has gone too far, Remy," he said, his voice low. "A rival party? You're trying to tear this family apart. My mother is beside herself." I slowly turned from the sink, wiping my hands on a dish towel. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. "I'm not the one who tore this family apart, Brian," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You let them gut our home. You stood by, no, you helped them, while they packed up our children's memories. You forwarded our private financial documents to them after I asked you not to. You have the audacity to stand here and talk to me about family? This family stopped including me the second you decided your mother's schemes were more important than your wife's heart. So don't you dare talk to me about going too far." He flinched, the mention of the financial documents hitting its mark. He had no defense, and he knew it. He just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, before turning and walking away. The day before Christmas Eve, Amy and I were putting the final touches on the house. We hadn't bought new ornaments. Instead, we'd done something better. We made a trip to a local craft store and bought wooden beads, dried orange slices, and spools of velvet ribbon. Lance, who was quieter than usual but watched everything with an unnerving intensity, helped us string cranberries and popcorn. We made it our own. For a centerpiece, Amy had a brilliant idea. She'd collected the shards of a few cheap glass ornaments that had been broken in the attic and, using glue and glitter, transformed them into a sparkling, mosaic-like sculpture. It was beautiful, resurrected. Meanwhile, Gianna's social media was a train wreck of forced cheer. She posted a poll asking her followers if they preferred charades or a white elephant exchange. She posted a frantic-looking selfie with the caption, "So much to do! Being the hostess is a 24/7 job to worth it." It was all falling flat. She was trying to manufacture the magic I had spent 15 years cultivating organically. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was expecting a flower delivery from Tatum, but when I opened the door, there was no one there. On the porch was a small, brown cardboard box. My name wasn't on it. In messy, childish crayon, someone had written, "Sophia." My blood ran cold. I picked up the box. It was light. I took it inside, my hands trembling as I tore open the tape. Inside, nestled in a bed of crumpled tissue paper, was Sophia's glitter-bombed kindergarten angel. It was shattered into a dozen pieces. The cardboard wings were bent and torn. The clumsy, smiling face I loved so much was cracked down the middle. There was no note. There didn't need to be one. It was a message, delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that only true cowards possess. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. I hid the broken angel before Sophia could see it. The rage that filled me was so absolute, so clarifying, it burned away any remaining shreds of doubt. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. Christmas Eve arrived, crisp and cold. While Gianna's house across town was likely a cavern of echoing anxiety, mine was a bubble of warmth and light. The scent of Tatum's beef Wellington and my neighbor's mulled wine filled the air. Soft music played. The house was full, not just with people, but with a palpable sense of camaraderie. Everyone who walked through the door gave me a look, a mixture of sympathy and defiant solidarity. I had made handwritten name cards for the buffet table. I'd set up a small table in the corner with craft supplies, and soon it was surrounded by the younger cousins, happily making their own ornaments to take home. It was everything Gianna's party wasn't: effortless, genuine, and joyful. After dinner, I gathered everyone in the living room. It was time for the reading of the family Christmas poem, a tradition my father-in-law Douglas usually performed with solemn duty. I had asked Lance if he would do the honors. My quiet, observant 13-year-old stood before the small crowd, his voice clear and steady as he read the familiar lines. He didn't falter once. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting in applause. I saw Douglas, who had surprisingly shown up alone, wipe a tear from his eye. Then Amy brought out a small, beautifully wrapped box. She handed it to Sophia. "We have one more ornament for the tree," she said gently. Sophia unwrapped it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a new angel. It was made of glittering, hand-blown glass, almost identical in shape and size to the one she had made, but infinitely more beautiful. Her eyes widened. "It's so pretty," she breathed. I lifted her up, and she placed it on the highest branch she could reach. The broken angel was their move. This was mine. We would not be defined by their ugliness. We would create our own beauty. Later, as the party hummed around us, Tatum pulled me into the kitchen. Her face was grim. "I need to tell you something, Remy," she said, her voice low. I wasn't entirely honest about why I was so willing to help. She took a deep breath. "Last summer, I was in town for a consult, and I drove by your house just to see it. I was working up the nerve to call you. I saw Deborah's car in the driveway. I watched her walk out your front door and put something in her trunk. It was one of your Christmas storage bins, the one with the ceramic village pieces." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Last summer? But that's months ago," Tatum finished. "This wasn't just a plan from 3 years ago, Remy. They've been actively taking things for a while. Planting the seeds wasn't enough. They were stealing the garden one plant at a time. The final devastating pieces clicked into place just as Jose, Gianna's husband, found me by the fireplace." He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear for the first time I could remember. "Remy," he said, his voice heavy, "I owe you an apology. For years, I've just gone along. It was easier." He shook his head. "I'm done with easy. I wanted you to hear it from me first. I'm separating from Gianna after the new year." I was stunned into silence. "It's not just her obsession with appearances or this cruelty she's shown you," he continued, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I found out she's been having an affair with a coworker for almost a year." He let out a hollow laugh. "All this time, she's been accusing you of not being authentic, and she's been living a complete lie." Poetic justice. It was swift, brutal, and more complete than anything I could have engineered. Just before midnight, as the last of the guests were leaving, my phone buzzed. It was a group text from one of Brian's cousins, the one who had felt obligated to make an appearance at Gianna's. The text contained a single photo. It was a picture of Gianna's cavernous living room. My decorations were all there, perfectly lit, gleaming on the oversized tree and mantel. But the room was completely, utterly empty. There were no guests, no family, no joy, just a hollow, beautifully decorated tomb. Later that night, after everyone was gone and the house was quiet, I found Brian sitting on the living room couch. A packed suitcase sat on the floor beside him. He looked up at me, his face etched with defeat. He knew he had no place here anymore. I didn't say a word. I just walked to the entryway table and picked up a manila envelope. I placed it in his lap. He looked down at the documents inside, the bold heading clearly visible. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Merry Christmas, Brian," I said. Christmas morning dawned quiet and bright. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't wake up at 5 a.m. to put a turkey in the oven. I woke up when the sun hit my face. Downstairs, Lance and Sophia were already awake, but they weren't frantically tearing open gifts. They were sitting on the floor with Amy and Tatum, who had stayed the night, drinking hot chocolate and talking quietly. The gifts under our new, simply decorated tree weren't extravagant, but they were thoughtful. A first edition copy of Lance's favourite book, a real artist's easel for Sophia, a vintage bottle of wine for Amy, a framed photo of Tatum and me as kids, one I thought had been lost forever. There was a peace in the room that had been absent from our holidays for years, a peace that came from being surrounded only by people who genuinely loved us. My phone buzzed with a text from one of the younger Jensen cousins. "Hey, just wanted to say thank you for last night. It felt like Christmas again. My parents are still mad, but my brother and I are with you. Let us know when we can see the kids." More messages like it trickled in throughout the day, small flags of allegiance from a family that was finally fracturing along its true fault lines. Late in the afternoon, a message from Deborah appeared on my screen. It was dripping with martyrdom. "I hope you're happy. You didn't have to destroy the family." I looked at the message, feeling nothing but a profound sense of distance. I didn't reply with words. I walked into my living room where my children were laughing with their aunts and took a picture of the calm, happy scene. Then I sent her back the photo I'd taken weeks ago. My empty living room, stripped bare. The before and after. My only comment. Later, Tatum and Amy helped me clean up. We gathered the last remnants of the cheap, store-bought garland I'd used to fill in some of the bare spots. We took it out to the backyard fire pit. "To new beginnings," Amy said, tossing a handful into the flames. It sizzled and vanished into smoke. "To knowing who your real family is," Tatum added, her arm around my shoulder. "I didn't need to scream to get my revenge. I didn't need to beg for my possessions back or engage in a petty war of words. I learned that the most effective retaliation isn't loud. It's the quiet, strategic removal of your presence, your warmth, your light. They thought the decorations made Christmas. They didn't understand that I was the magic. I was the tradition. And when they took me for granted, the whole spectacle collapsed. You don't need to burn down someone else's house. Sometimes all it takes is building a better one next door, opening your windows, and letting the sound of your laughter drift over the fence. All it takes is silence, perfect timing, and a guest list." A few days after New Year's, a large moving truck pulled up to the house. Brian had arranged for movers to get the rest of his things. I stood at the window and watched as they loaded boxes. One of the movers came to the door holding a single, large storage bin. "Ma'am, the husband said to make sure you got this one." It was the last of the Christmas decorations. My grandfather's star was nestled right on top. I didn't feel a rush of victory or relief. I just felt tired. I directed the mover to put the bin in the garage. I'd deal with it later, maybe next year. Maybe never. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I went up to the attic. In a dusty corner, I found an old wooden crate I'd forgotten about. It was filled with my grandfather's woodworking tools and some scraps of wood from his barn, the same wood he'd used to make the first star. I brought a piece downstairs. It was weathered and gray, but the grain was strong. I sat at my kitchen table, a carving knife in my hand, and began to whittle. Slowly, a new shape began to emerge from the rough wood. It wasn't perfect. It was clumsy and splintery in places, but it was mine. Some things they can't steal. They only think they can.